This was the Arizona Territory. In the late 1870s, it was a land of high red plateaus that burned under a white sun. The desert floor was cracked clay and stone, waiting for a rain that seldom came. When the wind blew, it did not cool. It carried fine sand that stung the skin and the scent of sagebrush and dry musk. It was a land that demanded silence from whatever lived on it. From the east, sometimes, that wind carried a new sound. It was the high, lonely scream of a steam locomotive. The sound was thin and metallic, and it tore the quiet. It was the sound of the New World, the Iron World, pushing its way deep into lands that had known only the hoof and the moccasin. Kai Yazi heard it. He heard it from the small cabin he kept pressed against the side of a mountain, tucked close to a canyon the people held sacred. He had built the cabin himself, using pine cut from higher elevations. It was solid, a small box of human will against the vast, open emptiness. He was a man who had once belonged to the Navajo, and then, for a short, bitter time, had belonged to the United States Army. Now he belonged to neither. He had been a scout. It was a choice he made when his people were starving, when the reservations were places of death. He thought he could guide the soldiers, show them paths, and in return, earn food and treaty promises for his kin. He learned quickly that the promises of soldiers were worth less than the smoke from their cigars. He had turned his back on their blue uniforms, just as he had been forced to turn his back on the people who now saw him as a traitor. He was a man caught between two great millstones, and he had chosen to step away from both, to be ground down by neither. He lived on what the mountains offered. He trapped beaver and fox, traded the pelts in the town below. He hunted deer for his own meat. His life was measured by the sun and the needs of his own body, and he asked for nothing more. He craved the silence. The silence was a balm, a thick blanket he pulled over his head to keep the world out. There was a map of his past etched onto his chest. A long, puckered scar ran from his left shoulder down across his pectoral, ending just above his heart. He had earned it in an ambush, years ago. When he still believed in causes, it was the day he lost the woman he was to marry. Her name was Whispering Water, and he never spoke her name aloud, not even to the wind. He had watched her die. He had watched her throw herself in front of him when the bullets came from the ridge. The bullet that should have taken his life had taken hers instead. He remembered the precise, terrible stillness of her eyes as life left them. From that day, silence became his religion. He had made a vow. He would never again allow his heart to become tangled with a woman. He would never raise a family. Attachments were liabilities. Love was a weakness that got people killed. If he remained silent, if he remained alone, no one else would die trying to shield him. His isolation was not a punishment. It was a protection for others. Twice a season, he would ride down from the mountain into the settlement of Dusty Gulch. The town was little more than one wide, rutted street lined with false front buildings, smelling of stale beer, horse manure, and desperation. He would tie his horse outside the trading post, his saddle heavy with cured pelts. The people of Dusty Gulch watched him. He felt their eyes, a mixture of suspicion and a grudging need. They saw a Navajo, and they feared him, but they also knew he was the best tracker in the territory. When a child was lost, or when cattle vanished into the canyons, they sent for him. They needed his skills, the very skills he had learned from the people they despised. He traded his goods with few words, bought his flour, his salt, his coffee, and his ammunition, and left as quickly as he had come. He never went into the saloon. He never sought company. There was a new energy in Dusty Gulch now, a nervous, greedy hum. It was the railroad. The Transcontinental was pushing a new spur line west, and the surveyors had marked a path that ran straight toward the mountains. The man in charge of this iron snake was named Silas Briggs. Kai had seen him. Briggs was a man who had once worn the blue uniform of an officer. Now he wore expensive suits and a hard, flat-brimmed hat. He moved with an arrogance that came from believing the land was his to tame, that the future was his to build. He was a man of cold appetites. Kai had watched him from a distance, seen the way he pointed at maps, the way his surveyors drove their stakes into the earth. Briggs saw the native tribes not as people, but as obstacles, weeds to be cleared from the path of progress. And Briggs wanted the sacred canyon. Kai knew this without being told. The canyon near his cabin was the only clear, convenient passage through that section of the mountains. To go around it would cost the railroad company months and a fortune. Briggs would not go around. He would go through. One hot afternoon, while Kai waited for the trader to weigh his fox pelts, he heard the talk. It always started in the saloon and spilled out onto the boardwalk. "Heard the new teacher is on the stagecoach," one man said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. He was a freighter with a sun-leathered neck. "A woman, ain't she?" another asked, leaning against a porch post. "From the east, they say." "Aye, some kind of missionary type. Name's Carter, coming to open a school." The first man laughed. A short, ugly sound. "A school for who the half-breed kids at the reservation waste of time. They cannot be taught." "I hear," the second man said, his voice dropping lower, "that she is young and unmarried, an innocent thing from Boston." There was a shared look between the men, a crude understanding that made Kai's hands tighten on his saddle horn. He knew that look. It was the look of men who saw a woman alone in a hard country as either a fool or a prize. "Silas Briggs is the one funding it," the freighter added. "Part of his civilizing project. He calls it bringing God and education to the savages. Likes the look of it in the newspapers back east." "Briggs," the other man grunted. "He'll probably civilize her himself, if you take my meaning." Kai took his supplies and mounted his horse. The talk of the girl, this Evelyn Carter, was a small stone dropped into the already tense pool of the town. He rode out, pushing the thought of her from his mind. It was not his concern. A white woman. A missionary. She was part of the world that was choking his own. He rode past the edge of the new reservation lands. The government had pushed the remaining Navajo onto a stretch of alkali flat, far from the good water, far from the high pastures where their sheep had once grazed. The people were thin. Their faces were etched with a quiet despair. They were trapped, and the railroad was the final nail in their coffin. Kai did not stop. He was the outcast, the one who had worn the enemy's coat. They would not welcome his counsel, and he had none to give. He was alone, a man balanced on the knife edge between two worlds, belonging to neither. That evening, the air grew thick and still. The drought was clinging to the land, sucking the last moisture from the soil. A flock of crows circled high above the canyon, their black shapes stark against the pale, hot sky. They were waiting. The land itself seemed to be waiting. In the Navajo camp, an old Hatali, a medicine man, smoked his pipe and watched the crows. He chanted a low song, a song of warning. He spoke of the iron snake that was coming to cut the sacred earth. He spoke of ill omens, of a balance disturbed. In his cabin, Kai Yazi cleaned his rifle. He barred his door. He sat in the fading light, listening to the wind. He had built a life of perfect, protective silence. But the world was getting loud. The scream of the train whistle was closer now, and the whispers from the town below were rising to a shout. The world was a bowstring pulled taut, vibrating with a tension that could not hold. Something, or someone, was about to release the arrow. The attack came just after noon, when the sun was a hammer and the air was thick with red dust. The stagecoach, a heavy Concorde, was rattling through a narrow cut between two mesas, a place where the road was little more than two deep ruts in the baked earth. This was the land near the sacred canyon, a place of echoes and high, lonely walls. Inside, Evelyn Carter was pressed between a large woman smelling of camphor and a thin man in a dusty bowler hat who had been silent for 6 hours. She felt sick. The rocking of the coach, the relentless heat, and the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach had conspired against her. She was a long way from Boston. The first shot was a sharp crack that sounded almost like a breaking axle. The man in the bowler hat slumped forward without a sound, a dark, small hole appearing in his chest. The large woman screamed. Before Evelyn could draw a breath, the air was filled with gunfire. Horses shrieked. The coach lurched violently, tilted, and then crashed onto its side with a sound of splintering wood and tearing canvas. Evelyn was thrown against the roof, which was now the wall. The world turned upside down. Dust and powder smoke filled the small space. Men were shouting outside, their voices harsh and guttural. The door above her was wrenched open. A man with a dirty bandana covering his face peered in, his eyes cold. He grabbed the large woman by the arm and hauled her out. Evelyn heard a single shot, and the woman screaming stopped. Another man reached for her. He pulled her from the wreckage, his grip bruising her arm. "This one," he growled to another. "She's the teacher." "Briggs said not to mark the teacher," the other man replied, his voice muffled by cloth. "Just tie her. We will deal with her later." Her hands were bound brutally tight with a leather thong. She was shoved back toward the coach, stumbling over the body of the driver. They were pulling trunks and mailbags out, throwing them onto a pack horse. They dragged 2 other male passengers away from the coach and toward the rocks. One of them was shot when he tried to run. The other simply disappeared, pulled behind a line of boulders. "Burn it," the leaders said. "Burn it all." A torch was tossed onto the dry canvas of the overturned coach. Flames licked up the side, catching instantly. The man who had tied Evelyn looked at her. He shoved her hard, sending her sprawling into the dirt and luggage near the back of the burning wreck. "Stay put, or you get a bullet like the others." He left her. She scrambled backward, trying to get away from the growing heat, but her bound hands made it clumsy. She saw a space beneath some smoldering mailbags and the overturned axle. Sobbing, she crawled into the small, dark space, hiding herself as the fire roared and the men rode away, their laughter swallowed by the wind. Miles north, Kayazi was checking his traps. It had been a poor morning. The drought was keeping the animals high in the mountains. He was kneeling by a stream bed that was only damp mud when he caught the smell. It was not wood smoke. It was the acrid, greasy smell of burning paint and cloth. He stood, his body tensing. His eyes scanned the horizon. To the south, rising from the direction of the stage road, was a thick column of black smoke. It was not a campfire. It was a funeral pyre. And above it, dark specks were already beginning to circle. The vultures. He felt the old, familiar knot tighten in his gut. This was trouble. White man's trouble. It had nothing to do with him. His vow was to the silence, to the empty spaces. He had learned, the hard way, that interfering in their world brought only death. He should turn. He should ride back up the mountain. It was not his concern. He stood still for a full minute, arguing with the man he had become. But the man he had been, the warrior, would not be silent. A fire like that, on a main road, meant an attack. It meant death. To ride away was to be less than a man. It was to be a coward. Cursing his own conscience, he mounted his horse. He did not ride fast, but with the caution of a scout approaching an unknown enemy. He moved through the rocks and juniper, keeping to the low ground, his rifle resting across his lap. He saw the scene from a ridge above. The stagecoach was a blackened, skeletal frame, still smoking. Bodies were scattered in the red dust. They were still. He watched for 10 minutes. Nothing moved except the heat shimmering off the wreckage and the vultures. Bolder now, landing near the dead horses. Satisfied the attackers were gone, he rode down. The silence of the place was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. He dismounted, his moccasins making no sound. He looked at the driver, at the man in the bowler hat. Robbery, but it felt like more. It felt personal. They had not just killed, they had executed. He walked around the wreckage, his eyes tracking the signs. at least 6 riders. They had come from the east, waited, and struck fast. He saw the marks where the 2 passengers had been dragged away. He saw the empty mailbags. He was about to turn, to leave this place of ghosts, when he heard it. It was not a cry for help. It was smaller than that. It was a faint, choked sound, a soft whimper, like a trapped animal. It was a sound of absolute terror and pain, trying its best not to be heard at all. The sound snagged on his memory. It cut through the silence he had so carefully built around himself. He had longed for a life untouched by the sounds of human suffering, yet here it was, rising from the ashes of the white man's world. The sound haunted him, pulling him forward against his will. He followed it, his rifle ready. The whimpers were coming from beneath the wreckage, from a small hollow under the burned axle and a pile of smoldering canvas sacks. He kicked the sacks away. She was curled into a ball, her hands tied in front of her. Her face was a mask of soot, streaked with tears. Her dress, a dark, heavy wool, was torn. One arm was held at a strange, unnatural angle. Her eyes, wide and blue, flew open and fixed on him. When she saw his face, the dark skin, the black hair tied back, the hard Navajo features looming over her, she screamed. It was a raw, piercing sound of pure terror. "No!" she gasped, scrambling backward. "Please, no more! I have nothing!" She thought he was one of them, and one of the attackers returned to finish the job. Kai's face remained a cold mask. He said nothing. He reached for her. She flinched violently, crying out as he grabbed her good arm. He pulled her from the hollow with one strong, impatient motion. She was light, like a bird. "My arm," she sobbed. "My arm, it is broken." He looked at it. The shoulder was dislocated, the bone clearly out of its socket. He looked at her tied hands. The leather thong had cut into her wrists. He pulled his knife. She screamed again, squeezing her eyes shut, turning her face away, bracing for the blade. With a flick of his wrist, he cut the thong. Her hands fell free. "Be still," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, low and guttural. Before she could react, he grabbed her bad arm. He put his boot against her ribs for leverage and pulled. Hard. There was a sickening wet pop as the bone slid back into the joint. Evelyn's shriek was cut short as the world went black for a moment. She slumped against him, the pain replaced by a wave of nausea. Kai held her up, unimpressed. He had set the shoulders of men thrown from horses. It was a simple, brutal fix. He tore a strip of cloth from her ruined petticoat, his knife moving with efficiency. He fashioned a quick sling, immobilizing the arm. He was all business. He was not saving a person. He was dealing with a problem. His plan was simple. He would put her on his horse, ride her to the edge of the main road, and leave her there. Someone would find her before morning. He would be free of this. He would have his silence back. He looked at the sky. The sun was bleeding into the western hills. The brilliant red and orange of the sunset was a warning. Darkness would come in less than 1 hour. And with the darkness came the wolves. He could already hear them, a faint chorus from the high ridges, smelling the blood on the wind. He looked at the woman. She was trembling, watching him with the terrified, fascinated stare of a rabbit facing a hawk. "You cannot leave me," she whispered. The words were a plea, a demand born of desperation. "They will come back. The animals. Please, I am begging you." Kai turned his back to her. He cursed under his breath, in his own language. He cursed the smoke, the vultures, and the sound that had trapped him. He cursed this woman, this white woman who had fallen into his world and shattered his quiet. She was a nuisance. She was a complication he could not afford. He looked at the burned coach. There was no shelter here. To leave her was to kill her. His warrior's honor, the part of him he had tried to bury, would not allow it. He could not kill her by his inaction. He went to one of the attackers, a man with a bandana still on his face, lying near the rocks. He rolled the body over. The man was a stranger, a hard case. But on the man's vest, half tucked into a pocket, was a small, tarnished brass pin. It was a scorpion. Kai froze. He knew that sign. It was the insignia of a mercenary company. Men who had scouted for the army years ago, before they were discharged for butchering a village that was supposed to be under treaty. A company that had been, for a short time, in the employ of Silas Briggs. This was not a robbery. A cold realization settled over him. This attack was planned. It was targeted. And it was connected to the railroad. To the man who wanted the sacred canyon. This woman, the teacher Briggs himself was funding, was not meant to be rescued. She was meant to be found dead. Another tragic victim of savage raiders, giving Briggs the excuse he needed to bring in soldiers and cleanse the territory. He looked back at Evelyn Carter. She was no longer just a nuisance. She was a witness, and she was in more danger than she could possibly imagine. Without a word, he walked to his horse. He lifted her as if she were a sack of flour, his hands strong and impersonal. He placed her in the saddle and mounted behind her, his left arm coming around her waist to hold her steady. She flinched at his touch, but she was too weak to protest. He turned the horse not toward the road, but toward the hidden path that led up the mountain. He urged the horse into a steady climb, leaving the smoking dead behind. They rode into the twilight. Evelyn was pressed against his chest. She could feel the hard, unforgiving muscle of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She could smell the scent of pine, leather, and the man himself. She was terrified, but she was alive. After an hour, they reached the cabin. It was small, dark, and looked as if it had grown from the mountain itself. He slid from the horse, pulled her down, and pushed the cabin door open. He lit a single oil lamp. The room was sparse, clean, and entirely male. A bed frame with furs, a cold stove, a table, and his rifles on a rack. It was a fortress. It was his sanctuary. He pointed to the bed. "You sleep there." He turned to bar the door. The solid chunk of the wooden bar sliding into place was the loudest sound in the small room. For the first time in so many years, since the day Whispering Water had died, Kai Yazzie was not alone in his house. The silence of his cabin was broken, shared with the soft, trembling breaths of a strange white woman. The cabin was small, and the presence of the woman seemed to suck all the air from it. Kai had built it as a shell, a place where he could forget the world existed. Now the world was lying on his bed, bleeding and trembling. Evelyn was not coherent. The shock, the dislocated shoulder, and the terror had brought on a light fever. She was coughing, a dry, dusty sound that racked her small frame. She had not slept, and she would not sleep. Every time the wind rattled the door, she flinched, her eyes flying wide, expecting the men with the bandanas to burst in. Kai felt a deep, irritable awkwardness. He was a man who understood the mechanics of survival, how to set a trap, how to read the sky, how to kill. He did not understand the mechanics of comfort. He especially did not understand how to care for a white woman who looked at him as if he were a ghost, or perhaps a wolf, who had decided to save her instead of eat her. He had given her water, which she drank greedily from a tin cup. Now, he took a deerskin blanket, one he rarely used, and spread it on the floor in the corner farthest from his own raised bed frame. He gestured to it. "You sleep here," he said. His voice was flat. She looked at the furs on his bed, then at the hard, cold floor. He had already claimed the bed. "No," she whispered. "I mean, I cannot." He scowled. "It is the only floor. Take it or stand." "The door," she said, her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden bar. "They will come, will they not? The men from the coach." "The bar will hold," Kai said. He did not add that if they truly wanted in, the bar would only slow them by a few seconds. "They will not look for you here." She clearly did not believe him. She pulled herself to her feet, her good hand pressed against the log wall for balance, her injured arm held tightly in the sling. She was pale, her face still smudged with soot that made her blue eyes look unnaturally bright. She looked at the blanket on the floor, then at him. The cabin was a single room, perhaps 12 feet by 16. There was no privacy, no escape. With a sigh that sounded more like a pained grunt, Kai ripped the furs from his own bed and threw them onto the floor in the corner. He then took the deerskin blanket and threw it on his bed frame. He pointed at the nest of furs. "There, sleep." He would take the hard bed. It did not matter. He did not intend to sleep. He sat at his small table, his back to her, and began to clean his rifle. The familiar, methodical actions calmed him. The smell of the gun oil, the scrape of the cloth, the weight of the steel. This he understood. He could hear her moving, the soft rustle as she settled herself into the furs. Then, the cabin fell quiet. Or so he thought. He finished with the rifle and laid it aside. He blew out the lamp, plunging the room into a deep, mountain darkness, broken only by the thin square of moonlight from the single window. He lay down on his bed, fully clothed, and closed his eyes, seeking the familiar, empty silence that was his only companion. It did not come. The cabin was no longer silent. It was filled with small, terrible sounds. He heard her breathing. It was too fast, too shallow. He heard the small, involuntary coughs she tried to muffle in the fur. And then he heard the whimpers. They were exactly as they had been at the roadside. So soft he almost thought he was imagining them. It was the sound of someone trying to cry without making a sound. A small, hitched breath. A long, trembling exhale that ended in a choked sob. Kai squeezed his eyes shut. He had sought silence to escape the sounds of a woman dying. Now his silence was filled with the sounds of a woman terrified of living. Every small gasp was a needle under his skin. It was an intrusion, a violation of the peace he had bled to earn. He turned onto his side, his back to the room, pulling a thin blanket over his head. It did not help. The sounds seemed to drill directly into his ear, the soft whimpers, the shifting of her body, the catch in her throat. He endured it for what felt like hours. The moon crawled across the floor. He heard her try to shift, and a sharp, sudden intake of breath told him she had moved her injured shoulder. The pain sent a fresh wave of quiet sobs through her. Patience, never his strength, snapped. Kai threw the blanket off and sat up. His movement was sudden, violent. He was on his feet in one motion, anger and exhaustion radiating from him. He was going to tell her to be quiet. He was going to tell her that crying did nothing, that it was a useless, weak sound, and that if she wanted to survive, she needed to be hard, like the stone outside. He crossed the 2 paces to her corner. The moonlight fell on her. He stopped. She was not crying freely. She had pulled a piece of the fur to her mouth. Her teeth clamped down on it, biting so hard he could see the white of her knuckles on her good hand. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and tears were streaming from them, carving clean paths through the soot on her temples and cheeks. She was making a desperate, agonizing effort to be silent, to not disturb him, to not be a burden. She was trying to respect his silence. The anger drained out of him, leaving a hollow, unfamiliar feeling. He saw her, not as an intruder, but as a small, broken thing, trying to disappear. His voice, when it came, was not the harsh command he had intended. It was a low rasp, rough and unused to softness. "If you must cry," he said, "do it. This cabin is not a church." Her eyes snapped open, wide and startled. She let go of the fur, her lip trembling. A fresh sob, this one loud, escaped her. She immediately clapped her good hand over her mouth. "I am sorry," she whispered, the words shaking. "I am so sorry. I am trying to be quiet. I... "You are not," he said, his voice still hard. He did not know how to make it soft. He sat on the edge of his table, a shadow in the moonlight. "Why are you here in this territory?" The question seemed to steady her. She took a ragged breath, wiping at her tears with her good hand. I am a teacher, or I was supposed to be. A teacher, he repeated. The word sounded absurd. Here. I was coming to Dusty Gulch, she said, her voice growing a little stronger, as if the simple act of speaking were a comfort. I have never been west of Philadelphia. I thought it would be an adventure to help the people on the stagecoach. They were so kind. The man with the hat. He had not spoken all day, and then he just fell over. There was so much noise. The guns. She stopped, her breath catching again. I have never heard of a gun before. Not like that. Not to do that. She was looking past him, at the dark wall, seeing the scene again. I am afraid of the dark. I am afraid of the quiet. I keep thinking I will hear them. Kai understood that. He understood how silence could be a canvas for memory, how it could hold the echo of a gunshot for years. You are safe here, he said. It was a practical statement, not a comfort. Am I? She asked, her voice small, and she looked directly at him. It was a genuine question. He did not answer. Instead, he asked his own, Who hired you? A Mr. Silas Briggs, she said. He is managing the new railroad line. He is a philanthropist. He funded my position, the schoolhouse. He wants to civilize the native children. He said it was God's work. Kai's blood went cold. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the vast, moonlit emptiness. Silas Briggs. Do you know him? She asked, a new hope in her voice. Perhaps he will send a search party. He seemed like a very powerful, very kind man. He is powerful, Kai said, his back to her. Kind is not the word I would use. He remembered the brass scorpion pin. He remembered the talk in town. What else did you hear about Briggs? Nothing. Only one thing. It was at the station. Before we left, I overheard him speaking to some men. He was angry. He was looking at a map. What did he say? Kai pressed. He pointed to the map, to the mountains. He said, I do not care what the treaty says. That pass is the only way. And then he said, once the rails are laid and the troops are here, we will clear out those villages once and for all. I thought he meant relocating them, for their own good. Kai turned slowly. The moonlight caught the long, pale scar on his chest, visible in the V of his open shirt. He did not mean relocating. He knew the villages. He knew the pass. It was the sacred canyon, the place near his cabin. Briggs was not just building a railroad. He was planning a war, and the attack on the stagecoach. He was not trying to rob you, Kai said, the pieces clicking into place. He was trying to start it. A burned coach, a murdered teacher. He would blame the Navajo. He would have his excuse. Evelyn's face went from pale to ashen. No, that cannot be. He hired me. Why would he? To kill you, Kai said. You were a pawn. Your death was to be the spark. She stared at him, comprehension dawning, and with it a fresh, deeper terror. Then I am not safe anywhere. If I go to town, he will finish the job, Kai said. The silence that fell between them now was different. It was not empty. It was filled with the shadow of a large, cold-blooded conspiracy. Kai looked at this woman, this innocent from Boston. She was the one thing Briggs had not counted on, a living witness. His own private vow of silence suddenly felt like a child's tantrum. He had been hiding from his own ghosts, while a new, living evil was preparing to slaughter what was left of his people. His isolation had not been a shield. It had been a blindfold. It was a coward's silence, and he felt a hot spike of shame. I must tell someone, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but gaining a new, hard edge. There must be a marshal, a federal court, a newspaper. We must go to Dusty Gulch and tell them what he is doing. Kai let out a short, harsh laugh. Tell who the sheriff who drinks Briggs's whiskey, the judge who takes Briggs's money. You are a woman, alone. I am a Navajo. Who do you think they will believe? They must believe the truth, she insisted, trying to sit up, wincing as her shoulder protested. The truth is whatever the man with the most rifles says it is. Kai said, but you are right. We must go to town. To tell the marshal. No, Kai said, because the men who attacked you, the men with the scorpion pin, they know you were on that coach. When they do not find your body in the wreckage, they will come looking for you. They will clean up their mistakes. We cannot stay here. This cabin is the first place they will look, if they have any tracker half as good as mine. He saw the last of her hope die. She was trapped between the men who wanted her dead and this hard, cold man who offered no comfort, only a brutal reality. What will we do? She whispered. Kai walked to the stove. He began to build a small fire, not for warmth, but for coffee. Tomorrow, at first light, I will take you to the town. You will need your strength. And then, he said, staring into the growing flames, we will see who in that town is not on Silas Briggs's payroll. It will be a short list. He made coffee, strong and black, and handed her a cup. She drank it, her good hand shaking. The distance between them, the width of the small cabin, felt like a mile. Yet it was bridged by a fragile, unspoken understanding. They were two fugitives, bound by a secret that could kill them both. The rest of the night passed in near silence, but it was a shared silence. Evelyn eventually fell into an exhausted, fitful sleep in her nest of furs. Kai did not sleep. He sat at the table, his rifle across his lap, and watched her. As the first gray light of dawn touched the mountain, he rose. He moved with quiet efficiency, preparing his horse, checking his weapons. He went to a small wooden chest in the corner, one he had not opened in years. He pulled out a heavy wool cloak. It was dyed in the deep indigo and red of his clan, the pattern complex and beautiful. It had belonged to Whispering Water. He walked over to Evelyn. He touched her good shoulder. It is time. She woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear. Before she remembered where she was, she saw the cloak in his hands. You will be cold, he said, his voice flat. Your dress is torn. He draped the cloak over her shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled faintly of cedar and the past. It enveloped her. She pulled it close, the wool warming her, and looked up at him. She saw the scar on his chest, and for the first time, she did not look at him with fear, but with a dawning, complex curiosity. He opened the cabin door. The cold morning air rushed in, clean and sharp. Stay close, he said, and he led her out into the gray light, leaving the sanctuary of his silence behind. The journey down the mountain was slow. Kai had put her on his horse, and he walked beside it, his hand on the bridle. He moved with a long, ground-covering stride that was economical and silent. Evelyn sat astride, which was a scandal in itself, but there was no other way. The heavy Navajo cloak covered her from neck to ankles, hiding her torn dress and her shame. Her injured arm was a dull, throbbing ache, but the jarring ride up the mountain had been far worse than the careful descent. Kai did not speak. He was an extension of the land itself, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges above, the washes below. He was looking for dust plumes, for the glint of sun on a rifle barrel. He was looking for the men with the scorpion pins. They were about halfway to the town, crossing a wide, exposed alkali flat, when the wind changed. It had been still and hot, but suddenly a cool breeze touched Evelyn's face, carrying a strange, metallic smell. Kai stopped. He lifted his head, sniffing the air like an animal. His eyes narrowed as he looked to the north. Bad, he said, the one word sharp and final. What is it? Evelyn asked, her voice nervous. "Wind," he said. He grabbed the horse's lead rope. "We must find cover, now." He pulled the horse into a trot, moving toward a dark line of boulders and juniper trees at the edge of the flat. The sky, which had been a clear, pale blue, was turning a sickly yellow-brown on the horizon. The line of color was advancing, swallowing the mountains.
"What is that?"
Evelyn cried, her good hand gripping the saddle horn. "Dust," he said, his voice tight. "Hold on." The storm hit them with the force of a solid wall. One moment, they were in the sun. The next, the world was gone, replaced by a screaming, roaring cloud of red sand. The wind howled, a physical weight that tried to tear her from the saddle. The horse screamed, rearing in terror. Kai held the animal's head, shouting at it in his own language. His voice ripped from his lips by the gale. He pulled Evelyn from the saddle, his arm a steel band around her waist. She fell against him, half blind, choking on the grit. The air was so thick with sand it was like breathing dirt. "Cover your face!" he yelled, his mouth next to her ear. He pushed her against the lee side of a large boulder, using his own body to shield her from the worst of the blast. The horse was a terrified shadow nearby, its back to the wind. Sandblasted. Evelyn tried to breathe through her dress, but it was not enough. Kai ripped the kerchief from his own neck. It was dark blue cotton. "Here," he shouted. He wrapped it around her face, covering her nose and mouth, and tied it fast behind her head. He then pulled the hood of the heavy cloak up, shielding her hair and eyes. He pressed her back against the rock face, a shallow overhang that offered minimal protection. He stood in front of her, his own back to the storm. He was a solid, immovable object, his broad shoulders taking the full, stinging force of the wind. They were trapped. The world was reduced to a space of 2 square feet, a roaring, suffocating darkness of red dust. Evelyn was pressed tightly against Kai, her face buried in his chest. She could feel the grit working its way through his shirt. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He did not move. He just stood, enduring it, a living wall between her and the elements. She did not know how long they stood there. It felt like an eternity. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from inside her skull. This, she thought, was what the end of the world must feel like. She was terrified, but a small, strange part of her felt safe. She was shielded. The man who had been a terror in the cabin was now her only protection. Gradually, as if a giant hand were releasing its grip, the wind began to lessen. The roar subsided to a howl, then to a whine. The air, while still thick, began to thin. Light returned to the world, a dim, hazy red. Kai stepped back from her. His face was caked in dust, making him look like a statue carved from the red rock itself. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "It is passing," he said. Evelyn, her hands shaking, and unwound the kerchief. Her mouth was dry, her lips cracked. The world was new, coated in a fine red powder. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt inadequate. He merely grunted and went to check on his horse. The animal was shivering, its coat matted with mud where the dust had mixed with its sweat. But it was unharmed. Evelyn's hands went to the cloak, brushing the thick layer of dust from the wool. The storm had passed, but the air was cold now. She pulled the heavy garment tighter. Her fingers traced the pattern woven into the fabric. It was geometric, intricate, full of lines and crosses. "What do these patterns mean?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Kai was running his hand down the horse's leg, checking for injury. He did not look at her. "They are just patterns." "No," she said softly. "They are not. They are too deliberate. What is this one?" She pointed to a series of terraced blue shapes. He sighed, a sound of deep impatience. He turned to her. "It is the cloud, for rain." "And this?" she asked, touching a yellow zigzag. "Lightning, power." She looked at the cloak, a new understanding in her eyes. "It is beautiful." "It was my mother's design," he said, his voice flat, his gaze distant. He was not looking at her, but through her, at a memory. "She wove it for—" He stopped. "For whom?" Evelyn prompted gently. His jaw tightened. "For the woman I was to marry. It was her wedding cloak." The words hung in the cold, dusty air. Evelyn's hand recoiled from the fabric as if it had burned her. She suddenly felt the immense weight of the garment, not just its physical heaviness, but the weight of the life it represented. She was wrapped in the memory of a dead woman. She was wearing the ghost of his lost love.
"Oh,"
she breathed, her face flooding with color.
I cannot, I should not be wearing this."
She fumbled with the clasp at her neck, her good hand struggling to unfasten it. "Leave it," Kai commanded, his voice sharp. He strode over to her. "It is a cloak. It is wool. It keeps the wind out. The one it was made for is gone. It is dead, like the past. Stop being foolish." He turned and began to lead the horse back toward the trail, not waiting to see if she followed. His words were harsh, but Evelyn understood. He had buried his past so deep that he would rather see its relics used as practical tools than treated with reverence. To treat the cloak as sacred would be to acknowledge the pain, and he would not do that. She retired the clasp and hurried after him, the heavy wool a complicated comfort, a debt she did not know how to repay. They reached Dusty Gulch in the late afternoon. The town was still digging itself out from the sandstorm. Drifts of red dust were piled against the boardwalks, and the air was still hazy. They came in from the north end of the street, Kai leading the horse, Evelyn walking beside him, her small, booted feet a sharp contrast to his silent moccasins. The town stopped. A blacksmith, his hammer raised over an anvil, held the pose. Two men sitting outside the saloon, chairs tilted back. Let them slam forward onto the boardwalk. A woman carrying a basket of laundry froze in the middle of the street, her mouth open. They saw Kayazi, the savage outcast, the man they feared and distrusted, and they saw him leading a white woman, an injured white woman, her arm in a sling, her face smudged with soot and tears, her body wrapped in a native blanket. The whispers started instantly. They were as loud as the sandstorm. "That's her," a man muttered. "The teacher, the one from the stage."
"My God, look at her.
What did he do to her?" "He has had her up on the mountain all night. Poor thing." The crude suggestions, the lewd stares, the pointing fingers. Evelyn felt them like physical blows. She had survived gunfire and a sandstorm, only to be assaulted by the judgment of civilized folk. Her face burned with shame so hot it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She wanted to run, to hide, to scream that they were wrong. She pulled the hood of the cloak up, hiding her face. Kai did not look left or right. His face was a mask of cold stone. He was immune to their words, or perhaps he had simply heard them all his life. He ignored the crowd, walking straight to the building with the faded gold star on its door, the sheriff's office. He pushed the door open and nudged her inside. The office was small, hot, and smelled of stale tobacco. A large, overweight man with a stained vest and a silver badge pinned crookedly to it was sitting with his boots on his desk, reading a day-old newspaper. This was Sheriff Brody. He looked up, his eyes lazy. Until he saw them, his boots hit the floor. "Yazzie, what in blazes are you doing and— is that—" "This is Evelyn Carter," Kai said, his voice filling the small room. "She was on the stagecoach that was attacked yesterday." Brody's eyes widened, his expression a poor mix of surprise and official concern. "Miss Carter, we thought everyone was, well, we are glad to see you, ma'am."
"Sheriff,"
Evelyn began, her voice trembling.
"it was horrible.
They killed everyone, the driver, the other passengers. They burned the coach. They were... "Bandits," Brody finished for her. pulling out a small notebook and a pencil. "Yes, ma'am. It is a terrible business. We get 'em, Mexicans, mostly. Sometimes renegade Apache. They hit the stages, take what they can." He licked the end of his pencil. "Now, did you see any of 'em? Anything you can identify?" "They wore bandanas," Evelyn said. "But it was not a robbery. Not just a robbery, they were waiting for us. They were organized, and they were not Mexicans." "How would you know that, ma'am?" Brody asked, his voice still patronizing. "They spoke English," Kai said from the doorway, where he stood, arms crossed. "And they were not Apache. They were white men." Brody's eyes flicked to Kai, and his face hardened.
You stay out of this, Yazzie. This is official business. How would you know what they were?
"I found the wreck," Kai said. "I found her." "And you just found her?" Brody asked, his tone full of insinuation. "And kept her up on that mountain of yours all night? That is a mighty convenient story."
"Sheriff,"
Evelyn interrupted, her voice sharp with indignation. "This man saved my life. He rescued me from the fire. He set my shoulder." "I am sure he did, ma'am," Brody said, his smile greasy. "I am sure he took care of you." He turned back to his notes. "So, a band of unknown men. We will put a posse together. Look for 'em." "One of them," Kai said, his voice dangerously quiet, "wore a brass scorpion pin on his vest." The pencil in Brody's hand stopped moving. For half a second, the sheriff's eyes went from lazy to sharp, a flicker of genuine alarm. He recovered quickly.
"A scorpion means nothing. Probably some saloon trinket."
"They were hired men," Evelyn said, sensing the change. "They were hired by Silas Briggs. I heard him say he wanted to clear the villages from the canyon." Brody snapped his notebook shut. He stood up, his face flushed. "Now you listen to me. Miss, you are hysterical. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You are confused. Silas Briggs is the most important man in this territory. He is bringing the railroad, bringing progress. He is the one paying for your schoolhouse. You are accusing him of murder." "It is the truth," Evelyn insisted. "The truth," Brody said, pointing a thick finger at her, "is that you were attacked by savages, and it looks like you were found by another one." He jerked his thumb at Kai. "You are lucky he did not scalp you, ma'am. Now, I suggest you go see the doctor. Get your head checked. I will handle this." Evelyn stared at him, speechless. The entire structure of her world, the belief in law and order, in the goodness of authority, was crumbling. The man with the badge was lying to her face. He was protecting the murderer. Kai had not moved. His expression had not changed. He looked at Evelyn, a silent, knowing "I told you so" in his eyes. "Come," Kai said. "We are finished here." He turned and walked out. Evelyn, shaking with rage and disillusionment, followed him. "Where do we go?" she asked, standing on the boardwalk, feeling the eyes of the entire town on her again. "Dr. Graham," Kai said, "your arm needs to be set properly, and he is the only man in this town I would trust to hold a cup of water." The doctor's office was 2 doors down from the saloon. It was a small, clean room that smelled of carbolic and coffee. Dr. Graham was a thin, older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a weary face. His hands, however, were steady. A small, dark-eyed boy was sweeping the floor. He looked to be about 10 years old, a mix of Navajo and white. When he saw Kai, his eyes lit up, and he stood a little taller, gripping his broom like a rifle. Kai gave the boy a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "My goodness," Dr. Graham said, pushing his glasses up his nose as they entered. "It is you, Miss Carter. We feared the worst. And Kai, good on you for bringing her in." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Let me look at that arm." For the next 10 minutes, he worked, his touch gentle but firm. He unwrapped Kai's crude sling, his eyebrows rising. He set this in the field. Yes, Evelyn said, wincing. Well, the doctor said, carefully manipulating her shoulder. It is not a bad job for a savage, but we will wrap it properly. As he worked, he spoke in a low, calm voice. I saw Sheriff Brody heading to the telegraph office right after you left. He was in a hurry. He is warning him, Evelyn said, her voice flat. He is warning Briggs. Of course he is, the doctor said, not looking up from his bandages. Brody has been on Briggs' payroll since the day the surveyors arrived. So has the circuit judge, for that matter. He finished the knot and helped her put her arm back in a clean, professional sling. There, that should hold. He turned to Kai, who was standing by the door. You have stirred the anthill. Kai, bringing her here, alive. She is a witness, Kai said. She is a target, the doctor corrected softly. And so are you, now more than ever. Just as he spoke, the door to the office opened. A tall man in an expensive black suit filled the doorway. He had a clean-shaven face, cold gray eyes, and an air of absolute authority. It was Silas Briggs. He ignored Kai and the doctor, rushing to Evelyn's side, his face a mask of profound concern. Miss Carter Evelyn, thank the Lord, he said, taking her good hand in both of his. His grip was smooth, dry, and possessive. When I heard the news on the stage, I was devastated. I cannot tell you the relief I feel, seeing you alive. Mr. Briggs, Evelyn said, pulling her hand free, her voice cold. I am surprised to see you. I rode in as soon as I heard the terrible news, he said smoothly. His eyes flicked to Kai, who stood silent by the door. The look was one of utter contempt, a man looking at a piece of dirt on his boot. And I see you have had a difficult time, abducted by this person. He saved my life, Mr. Briggs, Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. Of course, Briggs said, patting her shoulder. A terrifying ordeal. It is a tragedy. This is what we are fighting. Miss Carter, the savagery of this land. These renegade natives, they are like wolves. They prey on the innocent. First your coach, and then this one. He jested at Kai. Finds you. You are lucky to be alive. It was not natives who attacked the coach, Evelyn said, her eyes locking with his. Briggs' smile did not falter, but his eyes went flat and cold. What are you saying, my dear? It was white men, Kai said from the door. Your men, the ones with the scorpion pins? Briggs turned his head slowly to look at Kai. He let out a short, condescending laugh. Ah, Yazzie, I should have known. Still poisoning the well. He turned back to the room, to Evelyn and the doctor, as if addressing a jury. This man is a known troublemaker, a traitor to his own people, a former scout for the army until he was discharged for insubordination. He lives up on that mountain, brooding. He sees conspiracies everywhere. He hates progress. He hates the railroad. You must not listen to his delusions. It is not a delusion, Evelyn said. I heard you myself. You said you would clear the villages to make way for your pass. The smile vanished. Briggs's face became hard. Miss Carter, you are clearly unwell. The trauma, it has confused you. I will not have my name or the name of this company slandered by a half-mad woman and a bitter native. He turned to Kai. You will be watched. Yazzie, your days of hiding are over. He then turned back to Evelyn, his concerned mask slipping back into place. You must come with me, Miss Carter. You are not safe. I have rooms prepared for you at the hotel. My personal men will guard you. We will get you well. He offered his arm. Evelyn looked from Briggs's outstretched arm to Kai, who stood silent, offering nothing. She saw the sheriff across the street, watching them. She saw the faces in the saloon window, all aligned with Briggs. The entire town was his. "No," she said.
"What?"
Briggs' voice was sharp.
"No, thank you, Mr. Briggs,"
she said, her voice stronger now.
I will stay at the inn, the public inn."
"That is not wise, my dear."
"I will be fine,"
she said. Briggs stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes calculating. He had lost control of her. "As you wish," he said stiffly. "Doctor, see to her." He turned and walked out, his boots loud on the boardwalk. Dr. Graham let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "the battle line is drawn." That night, Evelyn had a room at the Dusty Gulch Inn. It was small, bare, but it had a lock. Kai had taken a room across the hall. He did not say he was protecting her, but he was. Evelyn sat on the lumpy bed, the Navajo cloak folded at her feet. She was torn. She had defied Silas Briggs, the most powerful man in the territory, based on the word of a man who hated her world. She had seen the sheriff, the arm of the law, lie to her face. She remembered standing in the doctor's office, as he had checked Kai for any injuries from the sandstorm. He had made Kai take off his shirt. In the lamplight, she had seen his back, muscled and scarred, and she had seen his chest. She had seen the long, puckered white line that ran from his shoulder to his heart. It was an old wound, deep and terrible. She had seen his eyes, weary and full of a pain he would never speak of. And she had seen the eyes of Silas Briggs, cold, clean, and utterly empty. Her faith in the systems she had been raised with was dead, shattered in the red dust. All she had left was the word of the silent, scarred man across the hall. Her trust, new and fragile, was shifting. It was leaning toward him. The inn was loud, even with the door shut. Evelyn could hear the sounds from the saloon downstairs, a tinny piano, rough laughter, and the clack of glasses. It was a poor substitute for the deep, wind-scoured silence of Kai's cabin. She sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, her newly bandaged arm throbbing. The Navajo cloak was folded neatly at her feet. She had tried to give it back to him, but he had shaken his head. "Keep it. The town is cold." He was across the hall. His door was closed. She did not know if he was sleeping or sitting in the dark, watching, just as he had in the cabin. She felt terribly alone, an island of fragile truth in an ocean of lies. A knock came at her door, sharp and official. It was not Kai. She cracked it open. A man in a clean suit, one of Briggs' men, stood there. He was not a gunman, he was a clerk. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice polite but firm. "Mr. Briggs renews his offer. He is deeply concerned for your safety and your reputation. He has a small, secure house available for you. He insists." The man's eyes flicked past her, into the room, as if checking for someone. "He also wishes to discuss the plans for the schoolhouse. He has the land grant ready for your signature." It was an invitation, but it felt like a summons. He was offering her a gilded cage. He was trying to buy her silence with the very school she had come to build. "Please tell Mr. Briggs I am grateful," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "But I am quite comfortable here. I will call on him tomorrow to discuss the school." The clerk's smile was thin. "Mr. Briggs feels time is of the essence. He will expect you. Good day." He turned and left, his boots making a crisp, authoritative sound on the wooden floor. She closed the door, her heart pounding. The offer of the school was a test. He was waiting to see if she would be bought. Across the hall, Kai heard the exchange. He had not slept. He had been standing by his window, watching the street. He had seen two of Briggs's known gunmen take up positions across the road, their rifles leaning casually against the saloon wall. They were not watching the inn. They were watching his room. He was a marked man, and by association, so was she. The town was a trap. Dr. Graham had been right. They had stirred the anthill. He strapped his knife to his belt and slung a small pouch of supplies over his shoulder. He had to warn the people. He had to tell the Hatali, the medicine man, what he knew. Whether they believed him or not, he had to speak. He opened his door. Evelyn's door opened at the same instant, as if she had been waiting. "Where are you going?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "You cannot leave me here." "I am going to the camp," he said, his voice low. To the people, to warn them."
"They will not listen to Brody," she said. "They will listen to you."
A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. "You do not know my people. They have long memories. They will see me as a snake, but I must try."
"I will come with you,"
she said, grabbing the Navajo cloak. "No," he said, his voice hard. "You are a white woman. You are the teacher. You are the one Briggs wants. They will see you as a trick, a new lie I am bringing them. Stay here. Lock your door. Do not open it for anyone but me or the doctor."
"What if—"
"Do it," he commanded. He slipped past her and down the back stairs, disappearing into the alleyway before the men across the street even knew he was gone. He moved on foot, using the ravines and gullies, the same paths he had used as a boy. The Navajo camp was 5 miles from the town, hidden in a cleft of the mesas, near one of the only reliable springs. It was a place of poverty and pride. When he walked into the camp, the children stopped playing. The women who were grinding corn looked up, their faces hardening. The dogs did not bark. They cringed away from him. A man named Black Salt, whose brother had died in the massacre Kai had scouted for, stepped in front of him. "You are not welcome here, Yazzie," Black Salt said, his hand on his knife. "The man who walks with soldiers has no place by our fire." "I do not walk with them," Kai said, his voice even. He stopped, keeping his hands open and away from his weapons. "I have come to speak to the elder, to Hastian." "The elder has nothing to say to you." "I have something to say to him," Kai insisted. "It is about the railroad. It is about Silas Briggs." The name Briggs was a cold wind that blew through the camp. They all knew that name. Hastin, the old medicine man, emerged from his hogan. He was frail, his face a map of deep wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp. "Speak, then, scout," the old man said, his voice a dry rustle. "Speak your warning, and then leave us." They gathered around the small, smokeless fire. Kai told them everything. He told them about the attack on the stagecoach, about the dead teacher who was not dead. He told them about the scorpion pin and the mercenaries. He told them what Evelyn had heard the plan to clear the villages from the sacred canyon. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. "These are words," Black Salt said, spitting into the dust. "The words of a white woman, brought to us by a man who betrayed us for blue cloth and coffee. Why should we believe this? It is a trick. They want us to fight, so they will have a reason to bring the soldiers." "It is not a trick," Kai said, his voice rising. "I saw the pin. I know the men. They work for Briggs." "And you work for them," Black Salt accused, shoving a finger at Kai's chest. "You led them to us once before. How many bags of flour is this white woman worth? Yazzie." Kai's hand flashed out, grabbing Black Salt's wrist in a grip that made the other man wince and drop his knife. "I am not that man anymore," Kai said, his voice a low growl. "I came to warn you. The Iron Snake is coming, and Briggs will not go around. He will go through. He will kill you all to get to that canyon." "We will not fight," Hastian said, raising a trembling hand. Kai released Black Salt. "We have fought enough. We have lost enough. The Long Walk. It broke us. We signed the treaty. We will stay on our land. The white law protects us." "The white law is whatever Silas Briggs pays for," Kai said, his heart sinking. "Hastian, listen to me. They do not care about the treaty. And we do not care for your warnings. Traitor!" Black Salt sneered. "Go back to your mountain. Go back to your white woman. We will pray. The holy people will protect us." Kai looked around the circle. He saw fear in their eyes. He saw despair, but he did not see the will to fight. They were beaten, and they were trusting a piece of paper that he knew was worthless. "He will come in 2 weeks," Kai said, his voice flat. "When the moon is full, he will bring surveyors, and he will bring soldiers dressed as mercenaries. You will be prayers on a dead man's lips." He turned and walked away. No one called him back. He was an outcast, and he had delivered a message no one wanted to hear. He was halfway back to town when he heard footsteps behind him. He spun, his knife in his hand. It was Evelyn. She was out of breath, her face flushed, the heavy cloak clutched around her. Beside her was the small, half-Navajo boy from the doctor's office. The boy looked at Kai with awe. "I told you to stay," Kai growled, his anger at the council fire spilling over onto her.
I could not," Evelyn panted. "I was afraid. He came to me."
She nodded at the boy.
His name is Little Owl. He said he saw you leave and that you were going to the camp. He said he would take me. I had to know. I had to see."
"You are a fool," Kai said, grabbing her good arm. "You could have been seen. You put us all in danger."
"I was seen,"
she said, her voice shaking but defiant.
"I saw them. The council. The fire."
Little Owl, seeing Kai's anger, spoke up. "I took her the back way. Yazzie, no one saw. We watched from the rocks. She heard them." Kai looked at Evelyn. Her face was not afraid. It was changed. She was not the same woman from Boston.
They are not savages,"
she whispered, as if speaking of a great revelation.
"They are just people. They are families. They are afraid, and they hate you."
"Yes," Kai said, dropping his hand from her arm.
"They hate me. Now you know. Let us go."
They walked back to town in silence, Little Owl trotting ahead. When they reached the alley behind the inn, Kai stopped her. "Why?" Evelyn asked, her voice low.
"Why do they hate you so much? You are trying to save them."
Kai leaned against the brick wall, the fight from the camp gone, leaving him empty and tired. He looked up at the small patch of blue sky visible between the buildings. "Because I am the man who led the soldiers to their home." What do you mean?" "It was 10 years ago," he said, his voice flat, detached, as if reciting a history that had happened to someone else. "During the war, when the army was rounding up the people, taking them to the Bosque Redondo, the long walk, my family was starving. The soldiers came. They offered food. Treaty. They said they only wanted to control the renegades. They needed a scout who knew the canyons." He closed his eyes. I thought I could lead them. I thought I could save my family, barter for peace. I thought I would be a hero." His laugh was a dry, terrible sound. "I led them, a full company of cavalry. I led them to a canyon where a band of my people were hiding, the ones who had refused to surrender." He paused, the memory thick in his throat. "I thought it would be a talk, a surrender, but the officer, he gave an order. It was not a surrender. It was a massacre." He opened his eyes, but he was not seeing her. He was seeing the past. "They killed everyone. The women, the children. They set the Hogans on fire. I tried to stop them. I killed one of the soldiers. They shot me." His hand went to the scar on his chest. "I fell, and I watched. I watched." "The woman," Evelyn whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "The one who owned the cloak." He nodded, his jaw rigid. "Her name was Whispering Water. She was there. She saw them shoot me. She ran to me. She covered my body with her own. And they shot her in the back. She died on top of me. Her blood, it saved my life. I hid under her body until they were gone. I am alive because she is dead. The people know it. They know I led the soldiers there. They know I am the reason she is dead. I am the reason they are all dead." He finally looked at her, his eyes black with a pain so old and so deep she felt herself drowning in it. "That is why I went to the cabin. That is why I need the silence. I am a traitor, and I am a coward." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. They were not for herself this time, but for him. She understood. Now, his silence was not empty. It was a tomb, filled with the ghosts of everyone he had loved. He was not hiding from the world. He was trying to protect it from the curse he believed he carried. "You are not a coward," she whispered, her good hand reaching out, wanting to touch him, to touch the scar. But she stopped, her fingers trembling in the air between them. "You were betrayed." "It does not matter," he said, turning away. "The dead are still dead." "And what about me?" she said, her voice small but fierce. He stopped, his back to her. "What about my impurity?" she asked. He turned slowly, a look of confusion on his hard face. "What?" "In Boston," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I was not perfect either. I was not the innocent little virgin everyone thinks I am." Kai's expression darkened. "You?" "No," she said, shaking her head, a sad smile on her lips. "Not like that. I am a virgin, in body, but not in spirit. I was engaged to be married, to a lawyer, a very important man. His name was Arthur. He never saw me. He saw a wife, an ornament, a reflection of his own success. He wanted me to be quiet and pretty, and to agree with his powerful friends. He wanted to own my thoughts." She looked down at her hands. "One night, at a dinner, he made a joke about the poor, about the Irish. It was cruel. And I spoke up. I told him he was wrong, in front of everyone." She took a deep breath. He was furious. Not because I disagreed, but because I had embarrassed him. He told me that my opinions were not attractive. He told me my mind was a possession, just like my body, and that he would be the one to decide how it was used. "I broke the engagement that night," she said. "My family was horrified. My father, he is a minister. He said I had ruined my name, that I had failed in my duty. They shipped me out here. This mission was a way to get rid of me, to hide their shame. I am an outcast, too. Kai, I am here because I refuse to be silent." He stared at her, this small woman from a world he could not imagine, a world of soft hands and cruel words. He had seen her as breakable, fragile, but she was not. She was made of steel, just a different kind. "We are not so different," she whispered. "They tried to silence us both." He had no answer for that. The next day, Evelyn kept her promise. She went to the hotel where Briggs had his office. She told him she would consider his offer, but she needed to see the land grant for the school. He was charming, oily. He spread the maps on his desk. "Here, my dear, a full 10 acres, right by the creek. The perfect place to bring light to these poor, benighted children." He talked, and she listened, nodding, playing the part of the contrite, grateful teacher. As he was rolling up the maps, he accidentally knocked a ledger from his desk. Papers spilled across the floor. "Oh, clumsy me," he said, bending to retrieve them. "Just some old army records. You know, from the pacification 10 years ago. It is a messy business, but necessary." He let one paper rest on the desk as he gathered the others. It was an after-action report. Evelyn's eyes scanned it. It was dry. Military language engaged hostile Navajo band. Canyon. Neutralized threat, regrettable casualties. And then she saw it. At the bottom, a short list of known hostiles who had been killed in the action. The second name on the list was Navajo female, unidentified. Approx. 20 years. Associated with hostile Scout K. Yazzie. Below the list, the report was signed by the commanding officer. And below that, a commendation for civilian logistical support, signed by Silas Briggs. Her blood ran cold. He had been there. He had supplied them. He had been part of it from the beginning. This was not just a new crime. It was the continuation of an old one. The death of Whispering Water, the scar on Kai's chest. The root of it all led back to this man, smiling at her over his desk. "You see, Miss Carter," he said, stacking the papers. "A long, hard fight. But we are winning. Soon. This land will be safe for people like you." Evelyn managed to smile. "I see," she said. "Thank you for showing me." She ran back to the inn, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She burst into Kai's room. He was sitting by the window, oiling his rifle. "He killed her!" she burst out, breathless, barring the door behind her. Kai was on his feet, his rifle in his hands. "Who what?" "Briggs," she said. "He was there. 10 years ago. He supplied the soldiers who killed her. He signed the report. He showed it to me." Kai's face did not change, but the hand holding his rifle went white at the knuckles. He had known, in his gut, but to hear it, to have it confirmed, it was a new cold knife in an old wound. "He is not just greedy," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "He is a monster. He is finishing what he started. He wants that canyon because it is where It is a personal insult to him that your people even exist." Kai was silent for a long time. He put the rifle down. "We cannot stop him from talking," he said, his voice quiet. "We cannot stop him with a fist fight." "Then how?" she pleaded. "My letter. I can write to the newspapers in Boston." "Too slow," Kai said. "He will have his rails laid and your schoolhouse built on the bones of my people before that letter even crosses the Mississippi." He began to pace the small room. "You were right before. We need the white man's law. But not Brody, not the judge. A bigger law." "A federal inspector," Evelyn said, remembering the doctor's words. "Yes," Kai said. "There is a man, a federal marshal, not from here. He rides the rail lines. Dr. Graham knows of him, but he will not come for the word of a savage. He needs proof." "The report," Evelyn said. "I saw it." "He will never let you near it again." Kai said, "No, we need something else. We need one of the men who attacked you. One of the men with the scorpion pin." He stopped pacing. "Many of those men were mercenaries. They get paid, they get drunk, they talk. If we can find one, find a deserter, someone who is afraid of Briggs, and make him talk." "But how?" Evelyn asked. "We do not even know where they are." "I will find one," Kai said. "I will go to Silver City. It is a bigger town, more places to hide, more places to talk. I will hunt." "And me?" she asked. Kai looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the steel. She was not the woman he had pulled from the wreckage. "You," he said, "will be the good teacher. You will smile at Briggs. You will talk about your school. You will be the innocent white woman, the face he needs for his civilizing project. You will listen. You will listen to his clerks, to his surveyors, to the women in the town. You will be my ears here, while I am the hunter." It was a plan. It was thin, and it was dangerous. But it was the only one they had. "I will do it," she said, her voice clear, without a trace of fear. That evening, just as the sun was setting, he took her. He took her on his horse, not back to the cabin, but to the edge of the sacred canyon. They stood on the high rim, looking down into the deep, shadowed gorge. The red rock walls glowed in the last light. A single eagle drifted on the air currents below them. It was quiet. A vast, holy silence. "This is it," Kai said, his voice soft. "This is the place. This is what he wants to destroy." Evelyn looked at the beauty, the raw, ancient power of the place. She understood why they called it sacred. Kai turned to her. For the first time, he spoke without the harshness, without the distance. "I made a vow. Once. In this place. he said. After she died, I vowed to be silent. I vowed to never get involved, to never love, to never feel. I thought that was strength. He looked down at his own hands. It was not, it was fear. I was hiding. He looked back at her, his dark eyes holding hers. If I am to die here, in this place, I will not die in silence again. I will die with my eyes open. I will die fighting for this. Evelyn felt the tears well up, but she did not let them fall. This was not a moment for pity. It was a moment for strength. She stepped forward, and her good hand, her right hand, rose. She did not hesitate. She laid her palm flat against his chest, directly over the long, pale scar. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her hand. "You will not die," she whispered, her voice fierce. "And you will not be silent, and," she added, her grip tightening on his shirt, "you will not be alone. I am not running away this time. Kayazi, I am standing with you." The pledge they made on the high rim of the canyon, her hand warm upon his scar, was a moment of impossible, fragile peace. It hung in the air between them as the sun died, and they rode back to Dusty Gulch under a bruised purple sky, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of a shared, dangerous purpose. This peace was not allowed to last. A man lay on his belly 200 yards away, hidden by a cluster of sagebrush. He had been tracking Yazzie for 2 days. Under orders from Silas Briggs, he watched through a brass spyglass. He saw the white woman, the teacher, reach out and touch the Navajo. He saw her lay her hand on him as if she were a wife or a lover. He had seen enough. He crawled backward, mounted his horse, and rode hard for the town. He reported to Briggs in the back room of the hotel, the air thick with cigar smoke. She was with him, the trackers said, accepting a glass of whiskey, on the canyon rim, at sunset. Briggs, who had been staring at his maps, turned slowly. Alone. Just them. And she, well, she touched him, put her hand right on his chest, familiar like. The glass in Briggs's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. His face, usually so controlled, tightened. The idea of his project, his civilized teacher, willingly touching the native. It was a personal, visceral insult. It was contaminated. "She is compromised," Briggs said, his voice a low, cold hiss. He placed the glass on the desk. "He has poisoned her, the little fool." "What are your orders, boss?" the tracker asked. Briggs was silent for a moment, his mind working. He needed her. He needed the image of the innocent, Eastern woman, the minister's daughter, to sell his pacification project. He needed her face, her testimony of the savage attacks she had endured. A dead teacher was useful. A compromised teacher was a liability. But a rescued teacher, one pulled from the clutches of her dark captor, that was a story he could use. "The order stands, but with a correction," Briggs said. "I want the Navajo. I want Yazzie dead. I want his head brought to me. Understood, but the woman, you will not harm her. Do not touch her. Do not put a single mark on her. I need her face intact. She is the moral center of this enterprise. You will rescue her and bring her to me. Go, take the others. He is cunning. Do not fail." Kai spent 3 days in Silver City. It was a larger, rougher town, full of prospectors, deserters, and men running from their past. He moved like a ghost through its back alleys and saloons, listening. He found the trail of the Scorpion mercenaries, but it was cold. The man he was looking for, a drunkard named Pike who was said to be terrified of what had happened, had vanished. Kai learned only one thing: the mercenaries had been paid in full by Briggs' company, and they were still in the territory, waiting for the next phase. He rode back with a hard knot in his stomach. The plan was weak. He had no proof, only a dead woman's name on a 10-year-old report and the word of a missing, drunken killer. Evelyn was waiting for him. She had spent 3 agonizing days playing her part. She had smiled at Briggs, discussed floor plans for the school, and listened to the banal gossip of the townswomen, all while her insides were twisted with fear. She had taken to walking to the edge of town in the late afternoon, near the wagon trail, just to watch the horizon. She saw his dust cloud before she saw him. He was riding low and fast, his body part of the horse. Relief surged through her, so strong it made her weak. He saw her standing by the last wooden trough, the Navajo cloak wrapped around her. He reined his horse to a halt. "You should not be here," he said, his voice rough. "It is not safe." "I could not stay in that room," she said. "Did you find him?" Kai shook his head. "No, but they are still here. Briggs paid them." He was looking past her, his eyes scanning the low hills that bordered the town. His body, which had been relaxed for a millisecond upon seeing her, went rigid.
"What is it?"
she whispered. "Get on the horse," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "Kai." Now. Before she could move, the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet splintered the wooden trough beside her, spraying her with water and wood. She screamed. Another shot came from the rocks to their left. Kai drew his revolver in a single, fluid motion. He fired 3 times into the rocks, not at a target, but to provide cover. "Evelyn, the horse." He reached down, his arm like a steel band, and grabbed her good arm. He hauled her up, throwing her sideways across the saddle in front of him. She cried out as her injured shoulder banged against the saddle horn. He spurred the horse, digging his heels in. The animal lunged forward. Not toward the town Brody's men would be there, but away. Toward the open territory. Toward the mountains. Bullets kicked up dust around them. They were exposed. She was a dead weight, and the horse was carrying double. He heard the thunder of other horses behind them. The gunmen. They were being chased. "Hold on!" he yelled, wrapping his left arm around her waist, crushing her against him. He fired his last 2 shots over his shoulder. He could not outrun them. Not like this. He had only one choice, one path that he knew better than they did. It was the winding, treacherous game trail that led to his cabin. He turned the horse hard, sending it scrambling up a wash and into the labyrinth of red rock. He was breaking his deepest vow. He was running from the ghosts of his past only to run directly back to their home. And he was bringing another woman with him. Another woman he had put in the line of fire. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth. They rode for an hour, the pursuit falling back as the trail became too steep for a panicked chase. Kai knew the gunmen would not give up. They would circle. They would wait. As if the sky itself were responding to the violence. The weather broke. The dry, hot air turned cold. The sickly yellow sky darkened to a deep, bruised purple. The wind began to howl, and the first fat drops of the long-awaited rain began to fall. By the time they reached the cabin, it was a deluge. He half threw her from the horse, stumbling with her through the mud to the door. He kicked it open, shoved her inside, and ran back to the horse, leading the exhausted animal into the small, hidden lean-to he had built among the rocks. He ran back to the cabin. Evelyn was standing in the middle of the dark room, shaking. He slammed the door and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. It landed with a solid, final thud. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing hard. The only sound was the roar of the rain on the wooden roof. They were safe. They were trapped. Kai moved to the fireplace, his motions quick, angry. He struck a match and lit the kindling he always kept ready. A small flame flickered, casting huge, dancing shadows. The cabin was a small, cold box, and they were in it together. The storm settled in. It was not a passing shower. It was the true start of the seasonal rains. The temperature plummeted. The wind shrieked around the corners of the cabin. "They will not come in this," Kai said, his voice harsh. He was staring out the small window. "The trail will be a river. They will wait on the high ground, They will wait for the morning. He turned, and the new firelight caught his face. He looked haunted. This was his sanctuary, and it had been breached. Evelyn was shivering. Her dress was soaked. The cold was seeping into her bones, and the throbbing in her shoulder was a sick, constant pulse. But it was not just the cold. It was the fear. A brilliant flash of lightning lit the room, followed a second later by a deafening crack of thunder. The sound was not like thunder. It was like the explosion of a rifle, magnified 1,000 times. Evelyn cried out and fell to her knees, her good hand covering her ears. The sound of the stagecoach attack, the gunshot that had killed the man in the bowler hat, it all came rushing back. The cabin, her supposed fortress, felt like a trap.
No, no, no,
she whispered, her body curling into itself. Kai watched her. She was shaking uncontrollably. The low, soft whimpers he remembered from that first night began again, torn from her throat against her will. She was biting her lip, trying to be silent, but the terror was too strong. He heard the same sound that had driven him mad with irritation, the sound that had shattered his sacred silence. But this time, it did not annoy him. He looked at her, this small, terrified woman from another world, who had stood up to Briggs, who had listened to his darkest secret, who had placed her hand on his scar. He realized the whimpers were not an intrusion. They were a distress call, and his entire body, his entire being, was wired to answer it. The silence he had craved felt, for the first time, like a cold and empty failure. He did not speak. He walked to the wooden chest in the corner, the one he had opened for her once before. He took out the heavy indigo and red cloak. He unfolded it. It smelled of cedar and thyme. He walked to her. She was still on the floor, rocking, lost in the memory of the attack. She flinched as his shadow fell over her, expecting a sharp word, a command to be quiet. Instead, he knelt. He draped the heavy wool cloak over her shaking shoulders, and he did not let go. His hand stayed on the cloak, his fingers brushing her neck. He gently pulled her up. He sat on the floor, his back against the log wall, and pulled her with him, turning her so her back was to his chest, her head tucked under his chin. He wrapped the cloak and his arms around her. He was a solid wall of warmth. She was enveloped in him, in the smell of pine and leather and rain. She stiffened, shocked by the intimacy. And then, as another crack of thunder shook the earth, she collapsed against him, her good hand gripping his arm. It is just the storm," he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. It was the softest he had ever spoken. She cried. She cried for the men on the coach, for the fear, for the cold, and for the simple, profound relief of not being alone. After a long time, her sobs quieted. She was leaning against him, her breathing still shaky, but the panic had receded.
"You are the first,"
she whispered, her voice muffled by his shirt.
"The first what?"
he asked.
"The first man,"
she said, pulling back just enough to look at him in the firelight. Her face was stained with tears and soot.
"The first man who has ever seen me weak, afraid, and did not try to take advantage, or call me a fool."
He looked at her tear-bright eyes, at her trembling mouth. His own vows, his walls of silence. They were nothing. They were dust. This was real, this small, breathing, fighting woman. He had broken his vow by bringing her here. He would break the last one now. He lowered his head. His movement was slow, hesitant. He was giving her every chance to turn away. She did not. She watched him, her eyes wide, her breath held. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion, not of fire and hunger. It was a kiss of profound, aching gentleness. It was slow. It was chapped lips against chapped lips. It was the taste of rain and salt and the faintest hint of coffee. It was a promise. It was an admission. It was the end of his silence. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "I am afraid," he whispered, and the confession was torn from him, a secret he had held longer than the scar.
"Of them?"
she asked, thinking of the men outside.
"Of this?"
His hand came up to her face, his thumb stroking her cheek.
Last night, before the massacre."
He closed his eyes, the memory playing behind them. "The night before I led the soldiers, I was with her, whispering water. She knew I was torn. She was afraid, and I promised her. I held her, like this, and I promised I would protect her, that I would keep her safe, that I would always come back." His voice broke, a raw, jagged sound. "When I woke up, under her body, her blood, I knew my promise was a lie. My love, it was a death sentence. I ran into the silence. Evelyn, I vowed I would never love again, because if I love, they die. I kill them." He looked at her, his eyes raw.
"And I brought you here. I put you in the line of fire, just like I did her."
Evelyn listened, and she did not see a coward. She saw a man crucified by his own honor. She reached up with her good hand and laid it on his jaw.
"I am not your burden, Kai,"
she said, her voice fierce. "My choice, to stand with you, to come here. It was my choice. Do you understand I am not a ghost?" She touched his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his cheekbone. "I am not her. I am not a memory you have to avenge. I am here. I am alive, and I am choosing to be here. Let me be the one who stands with you when the sun comes up." He looked at her, truly seeing her, not as a replacement, not as a symbol, but as Evelyn, the woman who had fought back, who had believed him, who had shared her own story of being an outcast. He did not speak. He kissed her again, and this time there was a lifetime of broken silence in it. He lifted her and carried her a few feet to his narrow bed, the bed that had been empty for 10 years. The cabin was dark, the firelight low. The rain drummed on the roof, a steady, rhythmic sound. He lay down beside her, on top of the furs, and pulled the heaviest blankets over them both. He did not remove her cloak, and he did not remove his own shirt. They lay face to face, her good hand resting over his heart, her head tucked under his chin. They listened to the storm. The wind howled, but inside the small cabin, there was a new quiet. It was not the cold, empty silence of isolation. It was the shared, breathing warmth of two souls who had found shelter in each other. The fire burned down to red embers. The cabin door remained barred, and outside, in the cold, wet darkness, their enemies waited. The light that woke them was not the sun. It was a cold, flat gray. The rain had stopped. The world was utterly silent, muffled by the wet air. Evelyn woke first. She was still wrapped in Kai's arms. His breathing was deep and even. For a moment, she was simply warm. Then she remembered. The gunman. The morning. She stirred. Kai was awake instantly. His eyes snapped open, clear and alert. There was no softness, no lingering trace of the night's intimacy. There was only the present, the threat. He released her and was on his feet in one silent motion. He went to the window, peering through a small crack in the wooden shutter. "They are there," he said, his voice low. "Two of them, down by the rocks. They are cold, and they are impatient." He turned. He did not look at her with the tenderness of the night before, but with the focused gaze of a partner, a warrior. He went to the rack and took down his rifle. He checked the load. He then took down the heavy shotgun he kept for emergencies. He walked over to Evelyn. She was sitting up, pushing the hair from her face, her heart beginning to pound. He handed her the shotgun. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked. "My father taught me," she said, her voice a little shaky. "To shoot at tin cans. Never at a man." "You will not shoot," Kai said. You will stay away from the window. You will stay behind the stove. If I fall, and they breach that door, you will use it. Understood. She looked at the heavy weapon, then at him. The man who had confessed his fear of causing a woman's death was now handing her a gun and planning a battle. Understood, she said, her voice firm. He nodded once. He picked up his rifle. He was no longer just a man hiding from his past. She was no longer just a woman who needed saving. They were a team, and the sun was coming up. The siege at the cabin had been broken by the storm. Under the cover of the howling wind and blinding rain, Kai and Evelyn had slipped away, their tracks washed clean before the sun rose. The mercenaries, cold, wet, and angry, had found only an empty cabin. But escape was not victory. They were fugitives, and their time was running out. They retreated to the relative safety of Dr. Graham's office, the only neutral ground in Dusty Gulch. They needed more than Kai's testimony and Evelyn's memory. They needed proof that Silas Briggs would not be able to bury. The plan was split. Kai would hunt the men. Evelyn would hunt the paperwork. Kai rode to Silver City, a larger, fouler town where men like the Scorpion mercenaries went to drink and disappear. He moved through the smoky cantinas and cheap boarding houses, a Navajo ghost in a white man's hell. He found his quarry on the third night, a man named Pike, shaking with fever and whiskey, terrified of what he had done. Kai sat across from him in the dark. He did not threaten. He spoke of the scorpion pin, of the woman who had lived. By dawn, Kai had the full confession, the date of payment, the name of the paymaster, and the location of the rest of the mercenaries, all waiting for a second payday from Briggs. Back in Dusty Gulch, Evelyn played the part of the redeemed teacher. She was polite, grateful, and seemingly recovered from her confusion. She accepted Silas Briggs' invitation to review the plans for the schoolhouse, bringing Dr. Graham along as a chaperone, citing the lingering weakness in her shoulder. While the doctor engaged Briggs in a lengthy discussion about property lines and water rights, Evelyn went to the clerk's desk to review the list of supplies for the school, with a deft, practiced movement. She accidentally knocked a heavy ledger from the desk, papers scattered, amid her flurry of apologies. As she bent to help the clerk, her eyes found it. It was not a school ledger, it was a railroad freight manifest, and on it, a shipment of mining equipment to the exact camp Kai had identified. Beneath it, a secondary payroll ledger for security contractors. Pike's name was on it. The payment was authorized by Silas Briggs himself. She memorized the page number and the date. They met back at the doctor's office, the final pieces in place. "He will deny it," Dr. Graham said, polishing his spectacles. "He will burn the book and kill the drunkard. We need to force him to act in public." "He is already planning to act," Kai said, his voice low. "He will not let that canyon go. He plans to start his final survey at the full moon, in 2 weeks." "Then that is when it must happen," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "We must make him show his hand when the world is watching." The plan was set, thin as a spider's web. Kai would ride to the Navajo camp. He had to convince Hestian, the elder, and the remaining warriors to gather in the sacred canyon, to make a stand, not with violence, but with their presence. Evelyn, meanwhile, drafted a telegram. Dr. Graham rode 20 miles to send it from a different town, a town not owned by Briggs. It was addressed to a federal inspector in Santa Fe, a man known to be immune to the railroad's money. It warned of an impending, orchestrated massacre of civilians by railroad mercenaries, set for the full moon at the Rojo Canyon Pass. Kai's arrival at the Navajo camp was met with stones and insults. Black Salt, his rival, whose hatred for Kai had only deepened, spat at his feet. "You come again, traitor to lead more soldiers to us." "I come to ask you to make a stand," Kai said, facing the angry circle. He spoke to Hastien. "Briggs is coming for the canyon. The law will not stop him. We must. I have sent for a different law, a federal man. But he must find us there. He must see the truth. Hastian, his face etched with weariness, looked at the desperate families around him. He finally nodded. We will go. We will make our prayers in the sacred place. If we are to die, we will die on our own land. Black Salt watched, his heart choked with jealousy. He saw the trust the elder placed in Kai. He saw the hope Kai had brought. That night, convinced he was saving his people from another of Kai's betrayals, Black Salt slipped from the camp. He rode hard to Dusty Gulch. He told Silas Briggs everything, the gathering in the canyon, the plan, the presence of the white woman. He begged for protection for his people, in exchange for the head of the traitor, Kai Yazi. Briggs was delighted. The Navajo were gathering themselves for slaughter, and the traitor was delivering them. He moved his timeline up. He called it a final survey. He told his mercenaries it was an extermination, and for this, he brought in his final piece, a quiet, legendary gunman named Kane Black, a man who had never failed to finish a contract. The night before the confrontation, the canyon was still. The Navajo had gathered, the air thick with the smoke of prayer fires. The children were silent, their eyes wide. Kai moved among the warriors, not preparing for a battle, but for a defense. He set snares and rockfalls high in the passes, meant to slow, not to kill. He positioned the families in the high, defensible caves. Evelyn was there. She had refused to be left behind. She sat with the women, a strange figure in her Eastern dress and the gifted Navajo cloak. She found the children she had briefly taught in town. With a piece of charcoal, she drew letters on a flat rock, her voice soft in the firelight. She was teaching them their future, while outside, the past waited to destroy them. Dawn was cold, the light sharp. Kai stood on the highest ledge. He saw the dust cloud long before he heard the horses. They came in slowly, with lethal arrogance. Silas Briggs led them, handsome and clean on his black stallion, flanked by 2 men carrying surveyors' tripods. Behind them, 20 more men fanned out, their rifles held casually. They were not surveyors. They were the Scorpion mercenaries, and among them, a man in a long black duster who sat his horse with the stillness of a snake, Kane Black. Hastian walked to the center of the camp, his hand raised. This is a sacred place. You have no right here, Mr. Briggs. I have every right, old man, Briggs called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. He gestured to his men, who were quietly encircling the camp. This is the path of progress, a simple, peaceful survey. Now, you will take your people and leave. We will not, Hastian said. Then you will be removed. It was Black Salt who broke. He stood near Briggs, trembling, seeing the rifles, seeing Kane Black. He realized he had not been a savior. He had been a fool. No, he screamed, his voice cracking. He raised his old musket, not at Briggs, but at Kai, who stood on the ledge above. This is your fault. He fired. The shot was wild, striking rock high above Kai's head. It was the only excuse Briggs needed. They fired first, he roared. It is an attack. Clear them out. The canyon exploded. The mercenaries opened fire, bullets tearing through the teepees and cook fires. Kai's warriors returned fire, a desperate, disciplined defense, covering the retreat of the women. Evelyn did not run. She grabbed the 2 children she'd been teaching, pulling them by their hands toward a deep cleft in the rock. In here, go, she screamed, shoving them toward the other women. She turned. 3 mercenaries, seeing her, advanced, leering. Briggs's order rang out over the gunfire. Do not shoot the woman. I want her alive. Take her. The order made her a target. They lowered their rifles, pulling knives, eager to claim the prize. Evelyn lifted the heavy rifle Kai had given her. Her injured shoulder screamed in protest. She aimed high, over their heads, and pulled the trigger. The heavy boom and the whine of the bullet over their heads stopped them cold. They dove for cover. She had bought the children time. Kai moved like a ghost, his rifle barking, his shots finding their mark. He was trying to draw the fire of the man in the black duster. He knew Kane Black was the true threat. Kane, for his part, ignored the chaos. He was hunting. His eyes scanned the rocks, looking only for the man who was fighting back with skill. It became a duel. Kai would fire from one ledge, and before the smoke cleared, he was 50 yards away. Firing from another, Kane matched him, moving with a deadly, patient grace, cutting off Kai's escape routes. Kai slipped behind a tall hoodoo to reload. He heard the scrape of a boot on stone. Too late. He spun. Kane Black stood on an adjoining ledge, not 30 yards away, his pistol raised. He was smiling. He had his man. From her high vantage point, protecting the cave mouth, Evelyn saw it all. She saw Kai disappear, and she saw the black-coated man stalk him. She saw Kane raise his pistol. She saw Kai trapped. "Kai!" she screamed. Kai spun as Kane fired. The bullet tore a hot line across Kai's ribs, making him stagger. Evelyn did not think. She rested the heavy rifle on the rock ledge. The pain in her shoulder was a white-hot fire, blinding her, but she held it. She centered the sight on the black figure. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her back, her world dissolving in pain. She missed. The bullet did not find Kane's heart. It struck the rock face an inch from his boot. The impact, combined with the shriek of the ricochet, startled him. He stumbled backward. His heel found only empty air. He flailed, his arms grasping at nothing, and then he was gone. He fell from the ledge, tumbling into the deep shadows of the canyon, silent as a stone. The mercenaries saw it. Their leader, their legend, was gone. Their confidence evaporated. At that same moment, Kai, ignoring the fire on his side, led a charge from the rocks. The mercenaries, paid killers, not soldiers, lost their nerve. They broke. They ran for their horses. "Cowards!" Briggs shrieked, his face purple. He saw his perfect plan, his victory, turning to ash. "Stand and fight!" But they were gone, streaming back toward the canyon mouth. Briggs, enraged, yanked his own horse around, ready to flee. His path was blocked. A new column of riders was entering the canyon, their blue uniforms clean, their formations precise. At their head was a stern-faced man with a major's insignia, and beside him, looking relieved and grim, rode Dr. Graham. The federal inspector had come. The canyon floor, which seconds before had been a chaotic hell of gunfire and smoke, fell into a stunned, ringing silence. The only sounds were the moans of the wounded, the nervous stamping of the cavalry horses, and the wind, which had returned to whisper through the high rocks. Silas Briggs was frozen, trapped between the retreating backs of his hired army and the clean blue line of the United States cavalry. His face, so recently purple with rage, had gone pale. The officer at the head of the column was a major, a man with a hard, sun-creased face and eyes that missed nothing. He raised his hand, and his 20 troopers fanned out, their carbines held at the ready, effectively sealing the mouth of the canyon. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Briggs?" the major's voice boomed, sharp and cold. "I received a wire about a planned massacre. It appears I have arrived in the middle of one." Dr. Graham swung down from his horse and ran toward the Navajo camp, his black bag in his hand. Briggs, ever the politician, recovered in an instant. He swung his leg over his stallion, his boots landing softly in the dust. He took off his hat, his face transforming into a mask of grim, righteous duty. "Major," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "thank God you are here. We were conducting a peaceful, federally approved survey when we were set upon by these renegades." He gestured to the Navajo, who were emerging from the caves, their faces grim. "It was a brutal, unprovoked attack. We were forced to defend ourselves." "An attack," the major said, his eyes scanning the scene. He saw the dead mercenaries, the terrified women, the body of Kane Black lying broken at the bottom of a ravine. He saw the teepees, riddled with bullet holes. It seems a poor sort of ambush when the attackers are the only ones dead in their own camp. From the high ledge, Kai watched, his rifle still in his hand, his side a sheet of fire. He saw Evelyn, who had been clinging to the rock face, her body shaking from the recoil of her shot, push herself to her feet. "Major!" she called out, her voice clear and carrying. She scrambled down the game path, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, ignoring the men in uniform. She was stumbling, lurching, but she did not fall. She had stuffed the papers she had taken, and the written confession Kai had forced from the mercenary Pike, inside her dress, beneath the Navajo cloak. As she had rolled on the rocks, the blood from her re-injured shoulder and the graze on Kai's ribs had mixed, staining the front of her clothes and the papers she carried. She reached the canyon floor, a small, bloody and soot-stained figure, and walked directly to the Major's horse.
"That is a lie,"
she said, her voice shaking but furious. She reached into her cloak, pulling out the folded, blood-stained sheaf of papers. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I am the teacher Mr. Briggs hired. He is the one who attacked us. He has been trying to kill me since I arrived." The Major looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "That is a severe accusation, Miss—" "And I have proof," she said, holding the papers up to him. This is a copy of his freight manifest, shipping rifles and ammunition to his surveyors. This is his private payroll, listing payment to a known mercenary, a man named Pike, for security. And this," she held up the last, dirtiest page, "is that man's confession. He was one of the men who attacked my stagecoach under Briggs's orders." Briggs let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Major, you cannot listen to this. The woman is hysterical. She was abducted by that man." He pointed up at Kai, who was now slowly, painfully, making his way down the cliff. "That is Kai Yazzie, a traitor, a known killer. He has bewitched her, hypnotized her. He has filled her head with these fantasies to save his own skin. Look at her dressed in their savage clothes. She is not in her right mind." "I am perfectly in my right mind, Mr. Briggs," Evelyn snapped, turning on him. "For the first time since I arrived in this territory, I know exactly what I am seeing." "It is a lie, Major," Briggs insisted, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. "Hold, sir," the Major commanded. His troopers' carbines all snapped up, aimed at Briggs's chest. Briggs froze, his hand dropping. "Sergeant," the Major said, "ride to the canyon mouth. See if you can find any of Mr. Briggs's surveyors. Bring them to me." The sergeant and 4 men galloped away. They did not have to go far. The mercenaries, seeing the cavalry, had been trapped. Within 10 minutes, they were brought back, sullen, disarmed, and muddy. The Major dismounted. He took the papers from Evelyn's hand. He looked at the payroll. He looked at the confession. He then walked over to the captured mercenaries. "Who is in charge here?" he asked. The men looked at each other, silent. "Your leader," the Major said, his voice cold. "A man named Kane Black is dead at the bottom of that cliff. Your employer," he gestured to Briggs, "is about to be charged with insurrection and murder. Your payroll is in my hand. This is your one and only chance to speak." One of the men, the tracker who had spied on Kai and Evelyn, stepped forward. He had seen Kane fall. He had seen the army. He had no loyalty to a losing side. It is true, Major," the man stammered. "What the woman says. Briggs, he hired us, through Kane, first to hit the stage, to make it look like an engine attack. Briggs wanted the teacher dead, but the Navajo, Yazzie, he got to her first. So Briggs sent us to get her back and to kill Yazzie. That was the order this morning. Kill the Navajo,
get the woman." Burris's face went white. "You're lying."
"Silence. Mr. Briggs," the major commanded. He turned to the tracker. "He ordered you to fire on this camp."
"Yes, sir. He called it clearing the pass. He wanted it clean before the inspectors got here. He said it was just extermination."
The major nodded slowly. He looked at the bloody papers. He looked at Briggs. And then he looked up at Kai, who had finally reached the canyon floor. He was clutching his side, his face pale beneath its dark skin, but his eyes were black fire. "And you," the major said to Kai, "you are Kai Yazi." "I am," Kai said. "Mr. Briggs accuses you of being hostile, of leading this attack." Kai took a step forward. He did not look at Briggs. He looked at the major, and then at his own people, who were watching, their faces a mixture of fear, hope, and old hatred. He had been silent for 10 years. Now he would speak.
"He does not know the meaning of the word hostile,"
Kai said, his voice low and clear. 10 years ago, I was a scout for your army. I thought I was helping my people. I thought I was making peace. I led a company of soldiers, supplied by that man." He pointed a rigid finger at Briggs. "To a peaceful camp, not far from here. I was promised a parley, a surrender." He took a ragged breath, his hand moving to the long, white scar on his chest. "It was not a parley. It was a massacre. Your soldiers, paid by his money, killed women. They killed children. They killed the woman who was to be my wife. They shot me and left me for dead under her body. That is his progress. That is his pacification." He turned his gaze to Briggs, who visibly recoiled from the intensity of it. "He did not attack this camp today for a railroad. He attacked it to finish the job he started 10 years ago. He wants this canyon because it is our sacred ground, and he wants me dead because I am the one who lived to tell the tale." The canyon was utterly silent. The Navajo stared at Kai, their hatred for the traitor warring with the undeniable truth of his words. Black Salt, the man who had betrayed them, fell to his knees, his face in his hands, weeping. The major looked at Kai for a long moment. He had heard rumors of that massacre, a black mark on the army's record, quickly buried. Now, it was here, living and bleeding in front of him. He turned to Evelyn. "Miss Carter, your testimony." Evelyn stepped forward. She stood between Kai and the major, a bridge between two worlds. "Major, I came here from Boston. I came to teach. I believed in Mr. Briggs. I believed in the law he said he represented. I believed that civilization was a gift we were bringing to these people." She looked at Briggs, her eyes clear and hard. "I was wrong. I was a fool. I listened to Mr. Briggs, and he spoke of progress. But I listened to my own ears, and I heard him order the clearing of these villages. I saw the records in his office, the records of the massacre Kai just spoke of. His signature was on them." She turned back to the major. "The savage, Mr. Briggs speaks of, he saved my life. He protected me. When Mr. Briggs's men were sent to kill me, the hostiles you see, they are families, hiding in caves, trying to protect their children. I am a minister's daughter. Sir, I was raised to believe in the truth. The truth is that Silas Briggs is a murderer, a liar, and a monster. And I will not stand by in silence while he does this." The major had heard enough. He looked at Briggs, his face like granite. "Silas Briggs, you are under arrest for conspiracy, for incitement to murder, and for waging an illegal war against the civilian population of this territory." "You cannot," Briggs hissed, his face contorted. "Do you know who I am? I am the railroad. I am this entire territory. I will have your commission." "Sergeant," the major said, ignoring him, "confiscate his weapon, and his men, place them all under guard. We will take them to Santa Fe. The army will try you. Mr. Briggs." Two soldiers moved forward. They pulled Briggs' pistol from its holster and bound his hands behind his back. As they pulled him away, his eyes found Evelyn's. His mask of charm was gone, leaving only a bottomless, reptilian hatred. It was a look of pure, cold disbelief. Not that he had been caught, but that she, a small, insignificant woman, a minister's daughter, had been the one to do it. The major turned to Hastian. "Elder, this ground is now under the protection of the United States Army, pending a full investigation. The railroad will not be coming through this canyon. I will see to it personally." He then looked at Kai. "Your testimony will be required, Mr. Yazzie."
"I will be there,"
Kai said. The soldiers began to move out, herding their prisoners, including the weeping black salt, toward the canyon mouth. Dr. Graham was already moving among the Navajo, tending to the wounded. 2 warriors had been killed in the initial volley. Several more were hurt. As the sound of the cavalry horses faded, the Navajo began to chant. It was not a song of victory. It was a song of mourning, a low, keening sound that echoed off the rock walls. It was the song for the dead. Evelyn stood, her legs shaking, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only a vast, bone-deep weariness. She watched the women come down from the caves, their faces blank with shock, to kneel by their dead. She felt the communal grief, a wave of loss so profound it was physical. She was no longer an outsider. She had bled with them. The canyon, the sacred place, was still standing. The iron snake had been turned aside, at least for now. The air smelled of gunpowder and sage and the promise of rain. It had survived. She turned, looking for Kai. He was still standing where he had given his testimony. He was watching his people. He saw them looking at him, their expressions no longer filled with hate, but with a new, confused respect. He had spoken. He had saved them. He looked at Evelyn. He tried to take a step toward her. The fire in his side, which he had been ignoring for an hour, flared into a white-hot agony. The world, which had been so sharp, suddenly went gray at the edges. He had lost more blood than he knew. "Kai," he heard her whisper. He fell to his knees. The adrenaline was gone, and there was nothing left. He pitched forward into the red dust. Evelyn screamed and ran to him. She fell beside him, pulling his head and shoulders into her lap, her hand pressing against the bloody, torn shirt on his side. "No," she whispered. "No, you cannot, not now." Dr. Graham was there in a second, his bag open. "He is alive. He is just spent, lost blood. He has been running on honor for the last day." Yes's tears fell onto Kai's face, washing away the streaks of blood and gunpowder. She bent her head close to his, her lips by his ear, as the doctor worked. "You did it, Kai," she whispered, her voice fierce. "A promise. No more silence. It is over. We will speak. We will teach the children to speak. We will tell them your story." Time, in the high desert, did not heal all wounds, but it softened them. The sharp edges of violence and betrayal began to wear smooth, like river rock, under the steady flow of the seasons. 3 months passed. The events at the sacred canyon had sent a shockwave through the territory. Silas Briggs was gone. Taken in irons to Santa Fe, the trial was the talk of every town along the new rail line. With the federal major's report, the confession from the mercenary Pike, and Evelyn's clear, unwavering testimony, the case was solid. The railroad company, in a flurry of telegrams from back east, publicly disavowed Briggs, painting him as a rogue agent whose ambition had tragically overstepped his authority. The investigation, fueled by Evelyn's meticulously recalled details from the 10-year-old Army report, went deeper, uncovering a network of bribes and land fraud. Sheriff Brody was stripped of his badge, and the circuit judge quietly resigned. The railroad was not stopped. Of course, progress, as Briggs had called it, was too powerful a force, but it was blunted. The new company supervisors, anxious to avoid more scandal, officially rerouted the spur line. It would now bypass the sacred canyon entirely, taking a longer, more expensive route through the northern hills. The victory was small, but it was real. News, like water, finds its own level. The story of the fight, of the minister's daughter who had stood with the Navajo, spread along the telegraph wires and wagon routes. In some saloons, she was called a traitor to her race. In others, a madwoman. But among the homesteaders, the poor farmers, and the other tribes who had been bullied by the railroad, she was spoken of with a quiet awe. Kai recovered slowly. The bullet from Kane Black's pistol had glanced off a rib, a deep, hot graze that had taken more from him in blood and spirit than he had realized. Dr. Graham stitched him up, and Evelyn nursed him. Not in the cold, haunted cabin, but in a room at the doctor's own house. For the first week, he was consumed by fevered, haunted dreams, reliving the massacre, the death of Whispering Water, and the new, chaotic battle. He would wake, his hands clenched, a name choked in his throat. Evelyn would be there, her hand cool on his forehead, her voice a low, steady murmur. "It is over. Kai, you are here. You are safe." When his strength returned, he did not retreat to his cabin. He found he no longer wanted to. The silence of that small, empty room had lost its appeal. He walked, instead, to the Navajo camp. He was met not with stones, but with a profound, awkward silence. The people gathered, watching him. He was the traitor who had saved them. He was the outcast who had brought the white woman's justice to their door. Black Salt, the man who had betrayed them to Briggs, was in a federal jail, awaiting trial with the mercenaries. Hastian, the old elder, walked to him. He placed his thin, trembling hand on Kai's chest, over the old scar. "You have bled for us twice, my son," the old man said, his voice just loud enough for the wind to carry. "Once in betrayal, and once in honor. The honor has washed the betrayal clean. Your silence is over. Welcome home." Kai did not become one of them again. Not truly. He was still a man caught between two worlds, but he was no longer an outcast from both. He would spend his days in the camp, helping to rebuild, sharing his hunting skills, and speaking, in his quiet way, at the council fires. He still craved peace, but he found it now in the murmur of the camp, in the sound of children playing, in the shared work of a community. His silence was no longer a punishment. It was a choice, a quiet space he carried inside himself. Evelyn, too, found her purpose, the land grant that Briggs had offered as a bribe. She now claimed as a right. With the help of Dr. Graham and a few of the more penitent townsfolk, she began to build her school. It was not the white clapboard building she had imagined in Boston. It was a solid, single-room log house, built on the flat land exactly between the edge of Dusty Gulch and the Navajo reservation. It was a bridge made of wood and hope. She opened the door in the high, clear air of early autumn. On the first day, 10 children came. 3 were the pale, tow-headed children of a local rancher. 2 were the dark-eyed children of a Mexican blacksmith, and 5 were shy, silent Navajo children, including Little Owl, who came clutching a piece of charcoal as if it were a talisman. She taught them their letters, how to write their names, and how to count. She taught them in English, but she also learned from them. She pointed to a dog, and they would shyly whisper, "Le chai." She pointed to the sky, and they would say, "Ya." She wrote the words on her slate, in English and in the phonetic letters of her own language. And Kai, who often sat in the back of the small room, would give a low, approving nod. The tension in the town had not vanished. It had merely softened. Some of the women still crossed the street to avoid Evelyn. They whispered about the Indian lover, the woman who had betrayed her kind. When she walked into the general store, the talk would stop, and the proprietor would serve her with a cold, grudging efficiency. But others, the ones who had no stake in Briggs's railroad money, saw her differently. A poor farmer, whose son was learning to read for the first time, would leave a sack of potatoes on her doorstep. The blacksmith, whose daughter now practiced her numbers in the dust of his shop, retied the loose shoes on her horse for free. The children, as children do, cared nothing for the politics of their parents. They sat together, shared their lunches, and spelled out cat and son, their voices a clear, hopeful chorus. The cabin on the mountain was not forgotten. It became their sanctuary. On the last day of the week, when the lessons were done, Kai would be waiting with his horse. Evelyn would ride behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, and they would make the slow, familiar climb up the mountain. It was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was a home. It was a nest. They would light a fire, and she would read to him from one of the books she had brought from Boston. He would sit, his eyes closed, listening, not to the words, but to the sound of her voice, a sound that had become more necessary to him than the silence he had once craved. They would talk, sharing their days. They would argue, their wills striking sparks, about the future of the children, about the stubbornness of the town council. And sometimes they would just sit, saying nothing at all, and listen to the wind, or to the steady, peaceful drum of the rain on the roof. One afternoon, a warm day when the autumn sun felt like a blessing, Evelyn packed a basket. "There will be no lessons today," she announced. "We are going on a picnic." She led the children, all 10 of them, on the long walk to the mouth of the sacred canyon. Kai was already there, waiting for them on a high, flat rock, like a sentinel. The canyon was at peace. The scars of the battle, the bullet marks on the rocks, were already fading. The only sound was the high, thin cry of an eagle. The children ate, their laughter echoing in the vast, open space. When they were finished, Evelyn took a piece of white chalk from her pocket. She walked to a smooth, dark section of the canyon wall, a place sheltered from the rain. "This," she said, "is A." She drew the letter, large and clear. "And this," she drew it again, "is B." She taught them their letters against the ancient, sacred stone. Kai watched from his perch, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. This was a new kind of medicine, a new kind of mark on the stone. Little Owl, the boy who had once idolized Kai as a warrior, now watched Evelyn as if she were magic. He took the chalk from her. He looked at the wall. His hand, small and dusty, moved slowly. He drew a K, then an A, then an I. He stepped back. "Kai," he said, pointing to the man on the rock. The other children cheered, a small, bright sound in the immense canyon. Little Owl grinned, his face splitting with a pride he had never known. He had written a name. He had captured a man in chalk. Kai looked at the crude letters, and he felt something in his chest, beneath the old scar, shift and settle. It was a feeling he had not known in more than 10, a feeling of profound, unburdened peace. He sat on the rock, the sun warm on his shoulders, and listened. He heard the wind. He heard the eagle. He heard the bright, clear sound of Evelyn's voice, teaching, and he heard the laughter of the children, Navajo and white, learning a common language. He closed his eyes. He thought about the silence he had run to, the cold, empty silence of his cabin, the silence he had filled with ghosts and self-hatred. It had been a silence of fear. It had been the silence of punishment. This, too, was silence, but it was different. It was the vast, breathing quiet of the canyon, alive with the sound of the wind. It was the comfortable quiet between words. It was the peace he felt sitting here, watching the woman he loved teach children how to speak to the future. He did not need to run to this silence. He was already part of it. He was, at last, full. That evening, back at the cabin, the new rains began again. They were not the violent, driving storm that had trapped them. It was a gentle, steady rain, a blessing on the dry earth. The air was filled with the rich, clean smell of wet dust and sage. Evelyn stood at the open door, breathing it in. Kai came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. They watched the red earth turn dark, drinking in the water. Evelyn's hand, her good hand, left his. She brought it to her own stomach, her palm resting flat against her dress. She was quiet for a long moment, a new, inward-looking expression on her face.
"What is it?"
Kai asked, his voice a low rumble.
I do not know," she whispered. "It is just a feeling. I think the school is not the only new thing we are building." He felt her words, felt the small, secret hope in them. He said nothing. He just tightened his arms, pulling her back against his chest, and they stood together in the doorway, watching the future, in the form of a gentle rain, fall on the healing land. The feeling Evelyn had, standing in the rain-soaked doorway, was true. The new season brought not just the healing of the land, but the promise of a new life. They were joined not in a church, under the stern eyes of Evelyn's forefathers, nor in a grand ceremony. They chose a day in late spring, when the high desert was in its brief, violent bloom, the cacti crowned with brilliant red flowers. They stood in the shade of a lone, ancient cottonwood tree that grew near the new schoolhouse, a place that belonged to both worlds. There was no white dress, no expensive suit. Evelyn wore a simple blue cotton dress, and over her shoulders, Kai had placed the indigo and red cloak. It was no longer the shroud of a dead woman. It was a symbol of her place in this new family. Kai wore his cleanest buckskin shirt, his black hair tied back with a leather thong. The guests were few. Hastin, the Navajo elder, stood before them, his hands trembling with age, his eyes clear. Dr. Graham stood beside him, his worn suit brushed clean, representing the other side of their world. The children from the school sat in a ragged, excited circle on the ground, their faces scrubbed. "There were no rings," Hastin chanted, his voice a dry, reedy sound, a prayer to the holy people to bless the union, to make it strong, to bring them harmony. When he was finished, Kai stepped forward. He did not speak of love in the white man's way, of forever and passion. He spoke, instead, of a different vow. 10 years ago, he said, his voice low and clear, heard by all, I stood in the canyon and made a promise to the silence. I swore I would never again let a woman into my life. I swore my heart would remain empty, so that my weakness would never cause another's death. He turned to Evelyn, his dark eyes holding hers. That vow is broken. It was broken by a sound, the sound of a woman crying in the dark, trying not to be heard. He reached into a small leather pouch. He pulled out a string of polished, deep blue turquoise beads. They were old, the stones worn smooth with time. "This was my mother's," he said, placing it over Evelyn's head. "It is the color of the sky, for protection." He then said, "My new vow is this. I will never again turn away from the sound of suffering. I will never mistake silence for peace. I will listen, and I will answer." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She reached for the small, silver cross that hung on a chain around her own neck. It was the only thing of value she had brought from Boston. It was a gift from her father, the minister, on the day of her confirmation. She unclasped it. "This," she said, her voice soft but steady, "was my father's faith." She placed it in Kai's large, calloused hand. "It is a symbol of a world that did not understand me, but it is also a symbol of hope, of a new beginning." Kai closed his hand around the small, cool piece of silver. He did not wear it. He tucked it safely into the leather pouch, a piece of her world he would carry with his own. "Dr. Graham," his voice thick with emotion,
cleared his throat. By the laws of this territory, and by the grace of whatever God watches over this hard, beautiful land, I pronounce you man and wife. The children cheered, breaking the spell, and rushed forward to hug them. The cabin on the mountain was still their truest home, the place they went to escape the growing noise of Dusty Gulch. The railroad had arrived, though it was a mile north of the canyon, and the town was growing, loud and raw with new settlers and new money. One evening, they sat by the fire in the cabin, the wind howling outside. Evelyn was writing, a small, leather-bound journal open on her knee. "This place," she said, looking up. "It needs a new name. The cabin is not right. It is not just a building anymore." Kai was cleaning his rifle, the familiar, methodical task, a kind of meditation. "It is a house. It is made of logs. That is its name." "No," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "It is more than that. I was thinking, when I first came here, this room was so full of noise, the noise of my crying, the sound of your silence. It was a terrible, haunted place." She looked around at the small, warm room, at the shelves that now held her books as well as his traps. "And then, after the battle, we lay here. We listened to the rain. We listened to each other's breathing. The whispers, they changed." "It should be called the House of Whispers," she declared. "Not for the ghosts, but for us, for the secrets we told, for the fears we admitted, for the sound of a life being lived, instead of a life being hidden from—" Kai stopped his work. He looked at her, at the bright, intelligent spark in her eyes. He thought of the word, House of Whispers. He pretended to scowl. "It is a foolish woman's name." "It is," she agreed, smiling. "But it is the right one." He said nothing. He went back to oiling his rifle. But in his heart, he loved the name. The whispers of fear had become the whispers of love. She had renamed his prison and made it a sanctuary. In that House of Whispers, Evelyn spent many nights writing. She was not just writing in her journal. She was writing a letter, a long one, to a friend she had left behind in Boston. "My dearest Sarah, you must forgive my long silence. When I left, you told me I was going to a land of savages. And, in a way, you were right. But I did not find the savagery where we expected. I did not find it in the Hogans or the canyons. I found it in the hearts of men who look just like our fathers, men who carry Bibles and sign contracts. I came here to teach, but I have become a student. I have learned that justice is not a building with a flag on it. It is a choice, a hard one, that a person must make every single day. And I have met a man. You would not understand him. Sarah. He is nothing like the men we knew in Boston. He is a Navajo warrior, a man who once longed for silence so deeply that he built a wall of it around his heart. He ran from the world, from the sound of human life, because he had known too much pain. He was a man who wanted, more than anything, a life untouched by women, untouched by love. And then I arrived, a bleeding, weeping fool, pulled from a fire. My soft whimpers, the very sounds of the weakness I had been taught to hide. They were what haunted him. They were the one sound his wall of silence could not block. You see, my friend, my crying, it annoyed him so much that he had to save my life just to make it stop. And in saving me, he was forced to save himself. He was forced to speak. And his voice, when it finally came, was the truest I have ever heard. I am his wife now. I live in a log cabin on the side of a mountain, and I teach in a small school made of rough pine. I am happier, and more truly myself, than I ever was in our drawing rooms. Do not pity me. Pity, I have learned, is a useless thing. Instead, know that I am alive. I am truly alive. The letter became a story, a framework for the world to understand what had happened. It was a whisper sent from the high desert back to the loud, confident world of the East. Life went on. The railroad brought more people. The town grew. Evelyn's school grew with it. The first class of children, the 10 who had picnicked in the canyon, were now young adults. Little Owl, no longer little, was the brightest. He had devoured Evelyn's books. He spoke English as well as she did, and Navajo with the wisdom of Hastian. He was preparing to go east, to the white man's college, to study law. He was the first bridge. Others followed. Her students became interpreters, doctors, and community leaders, walking in the two worlds that had once been at war. One night, a year after their union, the house of Whispers was filled with a new sound. It was the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Evelyn was lying in the narrow bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small, swaddled bundle. Kai sat on the floor beside her, his large, rough hand resting near the baby's head. He was staring at the tiny, perfect face with a look of profound, terrified awe. The baby, a boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's black hair, began to fuss. Evelyn, her voice soft and humming, began to sing a simple English lullaby, one her own mother had sung to her. It was a song about a star, about the night, about safety. The baby quieted, his eyes drifting shut. Kai listened to her voice, the sound that had become his anchor, and then, so low it was almost part of the wind, he began to sing. Too, he added his own song, an old, ancient Navajo cradle song. It was a song about the holy people, about the corn, about the protection of the ancestors. The two melodies, one from Boston, one from the sacred mountains, twined together in the small, firelit cabin. They did not fight, they did not clash. They wove a new harmony, a soft, strong blanket of sound. Kai looked at his wife and his son. He thought, for a fleeting moment, of the title of his old life, the one he had given himself. Navajo warriors longed for silence, a life untouched by women. He had his silence. It was here, in this cabin, but it was not the cold, empty, sterile silence of a tomb. It was not the silence of a man hiding. It was the silence between heartbeats. It was the quiet of a shared breath. It was the pause between his wife's lullaby and his own. It was the profound, living quiet of a cabin that was no longer empty, but full. The West was still wild. It was still hard. Freedom, he had learned, was not just about having a fast horse and a good rifle. It was not about being left alone. Freedom was about finding the courage to choose. It was the freedom to decide which side you were on. The side of the silent, the cruel, and the powerful. Or the side of those who had no voice. The side of the ones who wept in the dark. Kai looked at his son, asleep in the arms of the woman who had taught him how to speak again. He stood, walked to the cabin door, and looked out. The sky was a sharp, brilliant spray of stars. More than he had ever seen. The air was cold and clean. He heard the wind in the pines, the call of a distant owl. He heard the soft breathing of his family behind him. He was not running from the whispers of life anymore. He was standing in the middle of them, and for the first time in his entire life, Kai Yazi smiled and welcomed them all in. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and be sure to hit that like button. And if you really want to support the channel, hit the hype button as well. It truly helps get these stories out to more listeners.